Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxation Bedtime History. Tonight we wander through the smoky streets of Berlin in 1910, where electric lights flicker above wet cobblestones, tram bells echo through the dawn haze, and the smell of coal smoke clings stubbornly to every coat you own. You drift into a city balancing awkwardly between old Europe and the modern machine age. One moment you pass horse carts splashing through mud, and the next you stare at glowing department store windows that seem to promise the future itself. It is exciting, crowded, loud, and honestly a little exhausting. You probably will not survive this without at least one lungful of soot and a permanent dislike of climbing apartment stairs. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in tonight, feel free to share your location and local time down below. Now, dim the lights. You wake before sunrise because Berlin does not believe in letting people sleep peacefully. The sound arrives first. Boots on wooden stairs. A baby crying somewhere beyond the thin apartment wall. A wagon rattling over cobblestones outside. Then, the distant whistle of a factory cuts through the grey morning air like an irritated schoolmaster demanding attendance. Your room is cold. Not dramatically cold in the romantic literary sense, just ordinary Berlin cold, the kind that slips patiently through cracked windows and settles into blankets, fingers, and bones. You sleep in a narrow apartment inside a Mietskaserne, one of the enormous tenement buildings packed tightly across working-class neighbourhoods of the city. Historians often point out that Berlin's population exploded during the late 19th century, growing from a modest Prussian capital into one of Europe's largest industrial cities within only a few decades. Unfortunately, city planners responded to this population boom with the architectural philosophy of stacking humans like nervous sardines. You sit up slowly beneath heavy blankets and hear the apartment waking around you. Somebody coughs in the next room. Somebody argues softly in the courtyard below. Somebody already seems angry about potatoes, which feels ambitious for this early in the morning. Outside the window, dawn hangs pale over Berlin. Smoke drifts from chimneys into the winter sky. Coal fires already burn throughout the city, feeding kitchens, furnaces, laundries, and factories. The smell reaches everywhere. By the end of the day, your clothes, hair, and probably your soul will carry a faint trace of soot. You dress carefully because clothing matters here. Even poor Berliners try to appear respectable in public. Boots are brushed, coats are repaired repeatedly, buttons are treasured like tiny investments. A curious detail from the period is that some working families passed good clothing down through multiple children and even cousins, with tailors constantly reshaping garments to fit changing bodies. Nothing truly dies in Berlin, it merely becomes someone else's trousers. You move toward the wash basin and discover the water is painfully cold. There is no comforting modern bathroom waiting nearby with heated pipes and fluffy towels. Instead, you splash icy water onto your face, while questioning the entire concept of civilization. Down in the courtyard, women already carry buckets. A cat slips between crates near the laundry lines. Somewhere above you a radio does not yet exist, so instead you hear live music in the form of a tired man whistling badly while cleaning boots. Berlin in 1910 feels busy before sunrise because nearly everyone works. Factory labourers, seamstresses, clerks, domestic servants, bakers, drivers, porters. The city runs on schedules, whistles, and exhaustion. German efficiency has already become famous across Europe by this point. Trains leave on time, offices worship paperwork. Even children often move through the streets with startling purpose. You head downstairs carefully because the stairwell is dark and smells faintly of cabbage, damp wool, and coal dust. The scent combination sounds unpleasant now, but after enough weeks in Berlin, your brain apparently accepts it as home. The front door opens and the city greets you immediately. Cold air rushes against your face. Horses snort steam into the morning. Tram tracks gleam wet beneath the weak sunlight. Newspaper boys shout headlines across the street. Somewhere nearby, fresh bread bakes inside a bakery, briefly defeating the coal smoke in one glorious moment of aromatic victory. You follow workers moving toward factories and offices. Most people walk quickly. Berliners have a reputation for bluntness and efficiency even then. Travellers from other parts of Europe often describe the city as energetic but emotionally chilly, like a very intelligent uncle who corrects your grammar during dinner. One widely accepted historical fact is that Berlin had become a major industrial powerhouse by 1910, producing machinery, chemicals, electrical equipment, and consumer goods at astonishing speed. Giant firms helped transform Germany into one of the world's leading economies. Yet the city still feels strangely uneven. Elegant department stores rise beside cramped worker housing. Electric streetlights glow above muddy roads filled with horse manure. Some citizens discuss philosophy in cafes, while others struggle simply to afford bread and rent. You pass a policeman standing near the corner in his dark uniform and spiked helmet. The famous Pickelhaube appears everywhere in Imperial Germany. It gives every authority figure the appearance of an extremely disciplined metal bird. Children hurry past carrying school books. A woman balances baskets on both arms while scolding a small boy. A veteran with a grey moustache sells matches beside the station entrance. Berlin contains endless movement, endless little dramas. Scholars still debate exactly how much ordinary Berliners truly admired the Kaiser during these years. Public displays of patriotism certainly filled the city. Yet private opinions varied enormously depending on class, religion, and politics, in working neighbourhoods especially. Socialist ideas spread steadily despite official suspicion. You reach a busy avenue where trams grind loudly along their rails. Sparks flash overhead from electric lines. This part always feels oddly futuristic compared to the quieter side streets behind you. Berlin proudly embraces modern technology. Electric lighting spreads rapidly across the capital during these years, and many citizens view scientific progress almost like a new religion. Of course, modernity also means you're nearly run over by a delivery cart because crossing the street in 1910 Berlin resembles a survival exercise designed by impatient horses. You step back just in time. The driver shouts something deeply unfriendly. A small comfort of history is realizing people have always been irritated by traffic. As morning brightens, more smoke rises across the rooftops. Church bells echo faintly through the haze. Factory chimneys tower above entire neighbourhoods. Laundry flaps between apartment blocks high overhead, like surrender flags from exhausted households. And beneath all this movement, Berlin carries a strange feeling of confidence. The empire seems strong. Industry grows rapidly. Science advances. New buildings rise constantly. Many citizens genuinely believe Germany is entering a glorious modern future. Yet you notice little hints of tension too. Military uniforms everywhere. Newspapers discussing foreign rivals. Workers muttering about wages. Intellectuals arguing in cafe about socialism, nationalism, and the speed of change itself. But those worries belong to later hours. For now, morning settles fully across Berlin, and you continue walking through the smoke and tram bells of a city that believes tomorrow will only become bigger, brighter, louder, and more powerful. It does not yet understand what waits only 4 years ahead. You continue through the morning crowds with your hands buried deep inside your coat pockets, partly for warmth, and partly because Berlin in winter encourages people to resemble suspicious detectives in cheap novels. The bakery smell that drifted through the street a few minutes ago becomes impossible to ignore. Warm bread possesses a special kind of power in industrial cities. It cuts through coal smoke, horse sweat, damp wool, and human exhaustion with heroic determination. You step into a small bakery already crowded with workers, the windows fog from body heat and steam behind the counter. Women move rapidly between trays of rolls, loaves, cakes, and dark rye bread heavy enough to qualify as defensive weaponry. Berliners take bread seriously. One commonly accepted historical observation is that German cities supported an enormous variety of regional breads by the early 20th century. Rye bread, wheat rolls, sourdough loaves, seed breads, dense black bread. Every neighbourhood bakery seems convinced its own recipe represents the peak achievement of civilization. You order coffee and a roll. The coffee arrives dark, bitter, and strong enough to restart a declining empire. Sugar costs extra, butter costs more. You quickly learn that breakfast in Berlin depends heavily on practical mathematics involving wages, rent, and how badly you wish to avoid starvation before noon. Around you, conversations hum quietly. A pair of factory workers discuss rising meat prices. An elderly man reads the newspaper with tragic seriousness. A young seamstress warms her hands around a chipped cup while staring out the window at passing trams. The atmosphere feels oddly intimate despite the crowd. Berlin apartment life pushes people together constantly. Privacy becomes a luxury item. A strange little detail from the period survives in memoirs and police reports. Many apartment buildings employed strict caretakers called Hausmeister, who monitored tenants, noise, visitors, and cleanliness with almost military dedication. Entire domestic disputes could erupt over muddy boots in hallways or laundry dripping onto the wrong balcony. Nothing says urban modernity quite like passive-aggressive warfare over cabbage water. You finish breakfast and climb back through your apartment building to collect a forgotten scarf. The stairwell feels warmer now from the growing activity inside. Doors open and close endlessly. Somebody drags coal upstairs in metal buckets. Somebody sings badly while shaving. Somewhere nearby, a baby continues its long campaign against silence. You notice how sound travels through the building. Every argument echoes. Every laugh spreads floor to floor. Families squeeze into small apartments containing parents, children, sometimes grandparents, sometimes lodgers renting spare beds. In poorer districts, overcrowding becomes a genuine problem. Reformers worry constantly about sanitation, morality, and disease spreading through cramped housing blocks. Historians continue discussing how much these crowded living conditions shaped Berlin's political radicalism before the war. Some scholars believe urban density encouraged socialist organizing and worker solidarity. Others argue the relationship was far more complicated. Either way, nobody enjoys sharing one toilet with half the building. You return outside carrying your scarf and nearly collide with your landlady. She stands in the entrance inspecting the pavement with the stern expression of someone personally offended by dirt. She nods once, not warmly, not cruelly, just efficiently. Berlin's social interactions often feel like brief administrative procedures. The street grows busier by the minute. Delivery boys weave between carts, women carry market baskets wrapped in cloth. Clerks hurry toward offices wearing stiff collars that look deeply uncomfortable. Respectability matters enormously in Imperial Germany. Clothing quietly announces class, ambition, and discipline. Even moustaches carry social meaning. A wonderfully odd cultural reality of the period is that facial hairstyles often reflected profession and status. Military officers favoured dramatic moustaches waxed into improbable shapes. Students copied them eagerly. Some employers even expected workers to appear neatly groomed according to class expectations. Imagine risking social disgrace because your moustache lacks sufficient national confidence. You pass through a narrow side street lined with small shops. Butchers display sausages behind glass windows. Tailors arrange jackets carefully beneath hanging lamps. A tobacconist opens his shutters while coughing into the morning air. The smell here constantly changes. Bread, beer, smoke, leather, damp stone, pickled cabbage. Horse manure waiting patiently around every corner like a loyal servant of history. Children play briefly before school begins. Their clothes appear layered and practical rather than fashionable. A little girl skips around puddles while holding a piece of bread nearly the size of her arm. Nearby. Boys imitate soldiers using sticks as rifles. Military imagery fills daily life so completely that even games borrow its language. Germany in 1910 remains deeply proud of its army and navy. Portraits of the Kaiser appear in schools, offices, taverns, and shops. Patriotic ceremonies occur regularly. Veterans wear medals on holidays. Yet ordinary people also joke constantly about authority figures. Berlin humour carries a famously dry edge. A local saying claims the city survives equally through discipline and complaining. You eventually reach a communal courtyard behind several apartment blocks. Laundry hangs overhead despite the cold. Women scrub clothing beside steaming tubs while exchanging neighbourhood gossip with astonishing efficiency. News spreads here faster than any official newspaper. Who lost a job? Who drinks too much? Who receives suspicious late-night visitors? Who cannot pay rent? One well-known historical reality is that women performed enormous amounts of unpaid domestic labour during this period. Washing clothing alone required hauling water, heating it manually, scrubbing fabric, hanging laundry, ironing garments, and mending damaged pieces afterward. Entire days vanished into simple survival tasks modern machines now handle quietly in the background. You watch a woman beat dust from a carpet with terrifying determination. The carpet probably regrets everything. Nearby, an elderly man feeds pigeons while muttering about politics. Berlin contains endless political discussion. Socialists, conservatives, liberals, monarchists, trade unionists, Catholics, nationalists. Everybody seems convinced the future of Germany depends specifically on conversations happening beside laundry lines. The city itself reflects these tensions. Wealthy western districts grow elegant and modern with spacious boulevards and electric lighting. Poorer neighbourhoods remain crowded and smoky. Yet people move constantly between worlds through work, service jobs, transport lines, and commerce. You glance upward toward rows of windows stacked high above the courtyard. Hundreds of lives unfold behind those curtains. Clerks balancing budgets, mothers sewing clothing late into the night, children memorizing school lessons, couples whispering about bills, elderly veterans remembering older wars. Berlin feels enormous, but daily life often shrinks into tiny repeated routines. Coffee, bread, stairs, coal, work, laundry, sleep, then repeat. A lesser-known anecdote from the era describes tenants placing plants or bird cages near apartment windows simply to soften the harshness of urban life. Tiny bits of green or birdsong offered comfort against the endless stone courtyards and factory smoke. Human beings remain remarkably stubborn about creating coziness even inside industrial chaos. The church bells ring again somewhere beyond the rooftops. A tram rattles past nearby. Steam drifts upward from laundry tubs into the pale Berlin sky. And as the city settles fully into the rhythm of another working day, you begin to understand something important. Before the war, before the trenches, before the collapse of empires, Berlin is still simply a place where ordinary people wake up cold, drink bitter coffee, climb too many stairs, and try very hard to keep their boots respectable in streets full of mud. The deeper you move into Berlin, the more the streets begin to feel alive in a slightly threatening way. Not dangerous exactly, just crowded with enough wheels, hooves, smoke, shouting, and sudden movement to make crossing a boulevard resemble a tactical military exercise. You stand at the edge of a busy avenue watching traffic surge past and realize the modern city has not yet decided whether it belongs to machines or animals. Both are currently losing patience with each other. Horse carts rattle over cobblestones carrying coal, beer barrels, furniture, vegetables, and crates of machinery. Electric trams grind along shining rails with sparks flashing overhead. Bicycles weave recklessly between pedestrians. Delivery wagons splash through puddles while drivers shout warnings that sound more like personal insults. The noise never fully stops. Iron wheels strike stone. Hooves clatter sharply across intersections. Tram bells ring constantly. Somewhere a factory whistle screams again through the smoky air. Berlin in 1910 sounds mechanical but not yet smooth. Everything creaks, bangs, hisses, rattles, and protests while moving. One firmly established historical fact is that Berlin possessed one of Europe's most advanced public transport systems before the First World War. Electric trams expanded rapidly across the city, connecting distant neighbourhoods and helping millions of workers travel daily through the growing capital. Unfortunately, transport modernisation still shares the streets with approximately 1 million horses. You quickly discover the practical consequence of this arrangement: manure everywhere. The romantic image of old European streets tends to skip this detail, perhaps because nobody paints dramatic oil portraits titled "Noble Heap" beside tram stop. Yet contemporary Berliners complain constantly about filth, smell, flies, and the endless battle against mud mixed with horse waste. Street cleaners work continuously, but the city produces too much traffic to stay clean for long. You step carefully around a puddle that appears scientifically committed to ruining boots. Nearby, a horse snorts impatiently while steam rises from its flanks into the cold morning air. Working animals power much of the city's daily movement. Delivery teams haul impossible loads through crowded streets from dawn until nightfall. A curious little tidbit from the period involves horse safety shoes fitted with rubber padding to reduce slipping on wet urban pavement. Berlin streets became so chaotic and polished by constant traffic that animals frequently fell during bad weather. Industrial progress, apparently, still depends heavily on exhausted horses trying not to do accidental gymnastics. You finally cross the boulevard after surviving several near collisions with carts and one deeply judgmental tram conductor. The sidewalks remain crowded. Men in dark coats hurry past carrying briefcases. Women hold skirts slightly above muddy ground while navigating puddles and traffic. Children dart through impossible gaps with the supernatural confidence only possessed by youth and pigeons. Street vendors appear at corners selling newspapers, sausages, roasted chestnuts, matches, and flowers. Their voices blend into the larger rhythm of the city. Berlin feels hungry all the time, hungry for food, work, money, expansion, progress. The smell changes every few steps. Fresh bread from a bakery, coal smoke drifting low between buildings, beer leaking from a wagon barrel, wet leather, machine oil, cigar smoke. Then suddenly a sharp medicinal scent from a pharmacy doorway. Modern life enters through the nose long before it reaches philosophy books. You pause near an intersection where a policeman directs traffic with theatrical seriousness. His spiked Pickelhaube helmet catches weak sunlight, while he gestures impatiently at drivers. Berlin police maintain a reputation for discipline and efficiency, though ordinary citizens often view them with a mixture of respect and annoyance. Scholars still debate how heavily militarized daily life truly felt to average Berliners before the war. Uniforms certainly dominated public spaces, yet many residents likely viewed them as ordinary background scenery rather than signs of looming catastrophe. To you, though, the military flavour feels impossible to ignore. Young officers stroll confidently through the streets in immaculate uniforms. Veterans wear medals proudly on formal coats. Schoolboys imitate marching soldiers. Even posture seems militarized somehow. Shoulders back, steps brisk, faces serious. The empire likes people organized. You pass beneath a web of tram wires stretching overhead like metal vines. Electricity fascinates Berlin. Department stores advertise modern appliances. Newspapers praise scientific innovation. Wealthier homes begin installing electric lighting, while poorer apartments still rely on gas lamps and candles. The city exists halfway between centuries. At one corner stands an elegant cafe glowing with electric lamps and polished windows. Across the street, a tired woman empties ash from a coal stove into the gutter, while a horse drinks from a trough beside her. Progress arrives unevenly. A remarkable historical detail from this era involves Berlin's fascination with speed records and technological exhibitions. Crowds gathered eagerly to admire automobiles, airships, electrical demonstrations, and new machines promising to transform civilization forever. Most citizens, however, still walk everywhere in shoes that leak during rain. You continue along Friedrichstrasse, one of Berlin's busiest thoroughfares. Shop windows display hats, watches, gloves, books, and imported luxuries. Advertisements cover walls and kiosks. Commercial life grows louder every year. Department stores expand dramatically during this period, attracting middle-class shoppers with dazzling displays of modern consumption. Some traditional conservatives distrust these stores intensely. They worry giant commercial spaces encourage vanity, materialism, and women wandering around independently beneath electric lights. Honestly, the electric lights are probably innocent. A tram screeches to a halt nearby. Passengers climb aboard rapidly while the conductor rings his bell with visible impatience. Timing matters here. Berlin prides itself on punctuality with almost religious conviction. Workers late to factories or offices risk fines, dismissal, or public humiliation. You briefly consider how exhausting this rhythm must feel after years inside the city. Wake early, rush constantly, avoid traffic death by horse, repeat forever. Nearby, construction workers hammer steel beams into place around a rising building. Berlin expands relentlessly before the war. New apartment blocks, offices, stations, bridges, and factories appear across the capital at astonishing speed. Cranes and scaffolding dominate entire neighborhoods. Many citizens believe they're witnessing the birth of the greatest modern city in Europe. Others quietly suspect the city is growing too quickly for human comfort. A fringe rumour circulated during these years claiming Berlin's pace of industrial life damaged people's nerves permanently. Doctors increasingly discuss conditions related to stress, exhaustion, overstimulation, and urban anxiety. Some wealthy citizens escape temporarily to spa towns or countryside retreats simply to recover from metropolitan life. Meanwhile, workers continue inhaling coal smoke beside tram tracks, because capitalism rarely pauses for emotional wellness. You stop near the Spree River and watch barges move slowly through the grey water. Smoke hangs low above warehouses and bridges. The city feels enormous from here. Endless roofs, chimneys, church towers, and factory stacks stretching toward the horizon beneath a pale winter sky. And everywhere, movement continues, carts rumble, trams spark, horses strain against harnesses, crowds surge through intersections. Berlin does not drift gently into modernity. It charges toward it with muddy boots, burning coal, and a tram bell ringing impatiently behind you. The city carries you forward, whether you feel prepared or not. Berlin in the late morning moves with the relentless rhythm of machinery. Streams of workers pour through factory gates while clerks hurry into office buildings clutching folders and newspapers. Every clock seems important. Every minute already belongs to somebody else. You follow the crowd toward one of the industrial districts where smoke thickens above the rooftops and the air tastes faintly metallic. The streets here feel less elegant than the busy commercial avenues. Buildings grow harsher. Brick walls stretch beside rail lines and warehouses. Windows rattle from distant machinery. Factories dominate entire neighborhoods. By 1910, Berlin had become one of the great industrial capitals of Europe. producing electrical equipment, chemicals, locomotives, textiles, and machinery on an enormous scale. Giant companies employed thousands of workers under strict schedules that shaped the daily rhythm of the city itself. The factory whistle you heard earlier now makes complete sense. It is not merely noise, it is command. You stand near a gate as workers file inside beneath the watch of supervisors. Men wear caps and heavy coats darkened by coal dust and machine oil. Women hurry through separate entrances toward textile workshops, packing rooms, and assembly areas. Faces look tired already, even though the day has barely begun. Industrial labour demands endurance more than heroism. A few workers carry lunch tins carefully wrapped in cloth. Others smoke hurried cigarettes before entering. Nobody lingers long. Late arrivals attract attention, and attention from supervisors rarely improves anyone's mood. Inside the factory grounds, metal clangs against metal in harsh, repeating bursts. Steam hisses from pipes, belts spin, wheels turn. The entire complex vibrates faintly like some enormous iron animal digesting human energy. A lesser-known detail from factory records of the period reveals that many workers developed distinct hearing problems from years spent around industrial machinery. Some labourers reportedly learned to sleep through almost any noise because factory life permanently altered their sense of silence. Imagine becoming so accustomed to pounding machines that quiet itself begins to feel suspicious. You continue along the street and notice office clerks entering large administrative buildings nearby. Their world differs sharply from factory labour, yet it carries its own peculiar exhaustion. Germany's expanding bureaucracy requires armies of paper handlers. Clerks process invoices, schedules, shipping records, permits, military forms, tax documents, and endless correspondence. The empire practically runs on ink. Young men in stiff collars disappear into offices where they will spend entire days bent over ledgers beneath gas lamps and cigarette smoke. Their hands remain cleaner than factory workers' hands, but their backs ache all the same. Observers from the time often remarked on Germany's obsession with organisation and administration. Berlin offices earned reputations for precision, punctuality, and endless paperwork. Files moved carefully through departments while officials stamped documents with the seriousness of medieval priests handling sacred relics. You pass an open office window and hear the clacking of typewriters inside. That sound still feels modern somehow. Women increasingly work as typists and secretaries during this period. Though many employers still treat female office work as temporary employment before marriage, social expectations remain narrow despite the city's growing modern atmosphere. Some Berliners celebrate these new opportunities for women. Others complain bitterly that offices are becoming too informal, too fast, too filled with independent young women riding bicycles and earning salaries. Human beings truly can panic about anything. The closer you move toward noon, the busier the sidewalks become. Delivery boys weave between pedestrians carrying parcels nearly larger than themselves. Messengers hurry from office to office. Factory smoke hangs low beneath the pale sky, turning sunlight weak and yellow. You notice workers coughing frequently. The air quality in industrial Berlin grows notoriously poor during winter months. Coal furnaces, factories, locomotives, and household stoves pump smoke into the city day and night. Doctors increasingly warn about respiratory illness, though many citizens simply accept coughing as part of urban life. Some contemporary medical writers even described Berlin fog as having texture. That feels deeply unfair from an atmospheric perspective. You stop beside a small food stand where workers crowd together for lunch. Sausages hiss over hot metal while steam rises into the cold air. Bread disappears quickly. Mustard stains fingers and cuffs. Conversations remain brief because lunch breaks are short. Food tastes practical here. Heavy bread, potatoes, sausages. beer when possible, enough calories to survive another shift. A point still discussed by historians concerns whether industrial workers in Berlin experienced improving living standards before the war, or whether rising costs simply consumed most wage increases. Some families certainly gained access to better goods and housing. Others remained trapped in exhausting cycles of labour and overcrowding despite economic growth. Progress rarely distributes itself politely. You sit briefly on a bench beside the street and watch the flow of people continue around you. Office workers carry themselves differently from labourers. Supervisors walk differently from both. Even posture reveals class distinctions in Berlin. Confidence has its own architecture. Nearby, a tram conductor argues with a passenger over fare prices while a policeman pretends not to listen. Across the road, children chase each other dangerously close to wagon traffic until an exhausted mother drags them back toward the sidewalk. The city never truly pauses. One amusing account from early 20th century Berlin describes office clerks secretly racing each other during lunch breaks to see who could eat, smoke, and return to work fastest without angering supervisors. German punctuality apparently transforms even sandwiches into competitive sport. You continue toward a railway yard where freight trains sit beneath drifting smoke. Men unload crates while engines release slow bursts of steam into the grey air. Rail transport binds the empire together. Goods arrive from factories, ports, farms, and distant provinces before spreading outward again through Berlin's vast commercial networks. The city consumes constantly coal, steel, paper, labour, time, and yet amid all this industrial intensity, ordinary human habits persist stubbornly. A worker pauses to feed crumbs to pigeons. A secretary laughs quietly beside a doorway. A clerk straightens his tie in a shop window reflection before entering an office building. Tiny moments of dignity survive inside the machinery. The afternoon light begins fading earlier than you expect beneath the smoke cloud hanging over the district. Factory whistles will sound again later, releasing tired workers back into crowded streets and smoky apartments. But for now, the machines continue turning. Belts spin endlessly. Typewriters clatter behind windows. Steam drifts upward through the cold Berlin air, and you walk on through a city powered equally by ambition, discipline, and millions of exhausted people trying very hard to arrive on time tomorrow morning. By afternoon, Berlin begins smelling even more intensely of soap, steam, coal smoke, and damp fabric. You leave the factory district behind and return toward the residential streets where domestic life continues with its own exhausting rhythm. Industrial labour may dominate newspaper headlines and patriotic speeches. But much of the city survives because countless women spend entire days washing, scrubbing, carrying, mending, cooking, and fighting endless small battles against dirt. Civilization, it turns out, is mostly laundry. You enter another crowded courtyard between apartment blocks where washing lines crisscross overhead like surrender flags between brick walls. Steam rises from open windows. Buckets scrape across stone somewhere nearby. Somebody vigorously beats a carpet with enough fury to settle a family argument permanently. The sound echoes beautifully through the courtyard. Women bend over wooden tubs filled with cloudy water while sleeves remain rolled high above reddened hands. Soap smells sharp in the cold air. Wet fabric slaps against washboards. Children weave between baskets carrying pieces of coal or armfuls of clothing almost larger than themselves. Many Berlin apartments in working-class districts still lack private running water in 1910. Residents often haul water manually from pumps or shared taps before heating it on coal stoves. Laundry therefore becomes not merely a chore but an athletic event disguised as housekeeping. Your back hurts just watching. A social investigator from the era once remarked that a proper washing day could consume nearly every waking hour of a woman's schedule. Clothing had to be sorted, soaked, scrubbed, boiled, rinsed, wrung dry, hung carefully, ironed, folded, and repaired afterward. And because urban smoke coated everything constantly, clothes rarely stayed clean for long. Coal dust is the undefeated champion of Berlin. You pass a woman repairing socks beside a window while a kettle steams nearby. She works with extraordinary speed, fingers moving almost automatically beneath weak afternoon light. Fabric mattered too much to waste. Working families patched garments repeatedly. Shirts became smaller shirts for children. Blankets became coats. Old coats became cleaning rags. Nothing retired peacefully. An unusual little custom from some Berlin households involved saving even tiny scraps of useful cloth in boxes or drawers for future repairs. Buttons, ribbon pieces, lace fragments, old thread, entire domestic economies operated through careful reuse long before anyone invented fashionable conversations about sustainability. Your grandmother from 1910 would look at modern disposable culture and faint directly into a laundry basket. Inside one apartment, you catch sight of a kitchen no larger than a modern closet. A woman stirs soup while watching two children and ironing shirts simultaneously. The coal stove radiates heavy warmth mixed with smoke and cooking smells. Potatoes boil gently. Bread sits cooling beside the window. Meals require constant planning because food budgets remain tight for many families. Housewives track prices carefully at markets and shops. Meat counts as a luxury for poorer households, while potatoes, cabbage, bread, and soup appear endlessly still. Berliners take pride in feeding guests well whenever possible. Even poor families attempt moments of comfort and dignity. You climb another stairwell and immediately feel warmer from trapped cooking heat. Apartment corridors smell like onions, soap, damp wool, cabbage, tobacco, and humanity itself. Somewhere a baby cries. Somewhere a violin struggles bravely through practice scales. Somewhere a married couple conducts an argument at full volume about rent payments. The walls hear everything. Researchers examining working-class life in Imperial Berlin often note how little privacy existed inside crowded tenement housing. Entire families sometimes shared one or two rooms. Lodgers rented spare beds. Kitchens doubled as bedrooms. Children grew up surrounded constantly by adult conversations, worries, and neighborhood gossip. People became experts at pretending not to notice each other. You step aside as a young servant girl struggles upstairs carrying a heavy basket of coal. Domestic servants remain common even in middle-class households. Many young women leave rural villages for Berlin hoping to earn wages in urban homes. Though service work proves exhausting and heavily controlled, some employers enforce strict rules regarding curfews, behaviour, and even acceptable friendships. Imagine moving to the big city only to discover your social life requires approval from someone named Frau Gertrude, who inspects dust on furniture professionally. You return outside where afternoon light already begins fading beneath winter clouds. Laundry flutters overhead between buildings while steam drifts from communal washrooms. The entire neighbourhood seems engaged in endless maintenance. Sweep floors, carry water, clean ash, repair boots, peel potatoes, wash children. Repeat tomorrow. A topic still discussed among historians involves whether industrialisation truly reduced domestic labour for ordinary families before the First World War, while some manufactured goods became cheaper and more available. Many households actually faced rising expectations for cleanliness, appearance, and respectability. Modern life often invents new chores faster than it removes old ones. You notice a boy polishing shoes beside a doorway with serious concentration. His hands move carefully across cracked leather while pedestrians pass nearby. Appearance matters deeply in Berlin society. Clean boots and tidy clothing quietly announce discipline and self-respect even during hardship. Nearby, Two women discuss rising coal prices while pinning sheets onto lines overhead. Their conversation moves rapidly between household economics, neighbourhood rumours, and politics. Urban domestic spaces frequently become centres of information exchange. News travels through laundries and kitchens with remarkable speed. One charming report from pre-war Berlin describes women placing flower boxes on apartment windowsills, specifically to soften the grim appearance of industrial courtyards. Geraniums appear especially popular because they survive surprisingly well, despite smoke and cold. Tiny flowers fighting coal dust somehow feels very Berlin. You pause beneath one washing line where white sheets ripple gently against the grey sky. For a brief moment the courtyard looks almost peaceful. Steam rises softly. A child laughs somewhere above. Dishes clink behind open windows. Then a man empties stove ash directly into the yard and the romantic mood dies immediately. Still, there is warmth here too. Not luxurious warmth. Not easy warmth. Just the stubborn human habit of creating homes inside difficult places. As evening approaches, lamps begin glowing behind apartment windows one by one. Families gather round tables, soup simmers, wet clothing dries beside stoves. Mothers continue mending by fading light, while children complete schoolwork nearby. And all across Berlin, hidden behind brick walls and smoky courtyards, ordinary people spend enormous energy simply keeping life clean enough, warm enough, and stitched together well enough to face another cold morning in the empire's restless capital. Toward evening, the markets grow louder instead of quieter. You follow the smell first, not the coal smoke this time, not laundry steam or wet horses. This smell is warmer, richer, more alive. Sausages sizzling over hot metal, fresh bread cooling on wooden racks, vinegar from pickle barrels, fish packed in ice, roasted chestnuts crackling gently beside paper cones. Berlin's markets pull people toward them like gravity. You step into the swirl of noise beneath hanging lamps and striped awnings. Vendors shout prices across crowded aisles, while customers inspect vegetables with expressions suggesting the cabbage personally offended them. Baskets bump against coats. Coins clink. Somewhere nearby, a woman argues passionately over onions. This is not refined shopping, this is urban survival performed loudly. Food markets formed an essential part of daily life in pre-war Berlin, especially for working and middle-class families. Large municipal markets and smaller neighbourhood stalls supplied the rapidly growing population with produce. Meat, bread, dairy, and imported goods arriving through railways and canals from across the German Empire and beyond. The city eats from every direction. You move past barrels of pickled cucumbers floating in cloudy brine, while butchers display rows of sausages beneath yellow gaslight. Berliners adore sausages with a loyalty bordering on theology. Bratwurst, Blutwurst, Knackwurst, Bockwurst. Entire cultural identities seem wrapped in smoked meat and mustard. One vendor slices samples with ceremonial seriousness. You taste one. Your future doctor would probably object, but your immediate happiness improves considerably. Nearby, fishmongers arrange eels, herring, carp, and river fish over crushed ice while shouting offers into the crowd. The smell arrives long before the stall itself. Cats lurk hopefully beneath wooden tables, pretending not to beg. A delightful little observation from the era notes that some Berlin street vendors developed famous shouting styles, recognizable across entire neighborhoods. Residents supposedly identified certain sellers by voice alone before they even appeared around the corner. Human advertising existed long before glowing billboards. You stop near a potato seller surrounded by mountains of dirt, covered vegetables stacked almost like cannonballs. Potatoes remain foundational to the German diet. Cheap, filling, reliable, and capable of appearing in approximately 900 forms at dinner. Soup, pancakes, dumplings, boiled potatoes beside meat, fried potatoes beside regret, The market pulses around you with constant motion. Housewives compare prices carefully while calculating household budgets in their heads. Servant girls carry baskets for wealthier employers. Workers stop briefly before heading home from factories and offices. Everyone seems tired, hungry, and in a hurry. And an academic discussion that still continues today concerns how much Berlin's expanding consumer culture transformed ordinary social life before the war. Department stores, advertising, and wider food distribution certainly changed shopping habits. Yet traditional markets remain deeply important because many citizens trusted familiar local vendors more than giant commercial chains. Also, bargaining with a human being feels more satisfying than silently disappointing yourself in a supermarket aisle. You pause beside a spice merchant whose stall smells almost impossibly exotic compared to the cold Berlin streets outside. Cinnamon, pepper, coffee, dried fruit, imported tea. The German Empire reaches globally through trade routes and colonial ambitions. The most ordinary Berliners experience empire mainly through products arriving at markets and shop windows. A few customers examine oranges carefully as though holding treasure. In winter, fresh fruit feels luxurious. Children gather near a candy stall staring upward with complete devotion. Sugar becomes increasingly available during these years thanks partly to Germany's enormous sugar beet industry. Sweets remain treats rather than daily habits for poorer families, which perhaps explains why children gaze at them like medieval pilgrims witnessing miracles. A small boy presses his nose against glass jars full of striped candy sticks. His mother drags him away before economic collapse occurs. Further inside the market hall, the air grows warmer and wetter, gas lamps flicker overhead, while voices echo against iron beams. Meat hooks shine dimly, aprons stain red and brown from long work days. Vendors wipe hands constantly on cloths already defeated by grease hours ago. Sanitation improves gradually in Berlin during this period, but by modern standards many food handling practices remain adventurous. Ice preservation helps somewhat. Municipal inspectors monitor certain markets. Still, you quickly understand why stomach illnesses appear regularly in old city records. Your immune system in 1910 requires courage. You pass a beer stall crowded with workers already beginning their evening relaxation. Thick glasses foam beneath gaslight, while conversations rise louder by the minute. Politics drifts through the air beside tobacco smoke. Social Democrats criticize the government. Nationalists praise the Kaiser. Someone complains about tram fares with revolutionary intensity. Berliners love debate almost as much as sausage. One colourful anecdote from the period describes market women mocking pompous officials so effectively that local politicians occasionally avoided certain stalls entirely. Sharp humour thrives in crowded cities, where people spend long days surviving together. You suspect these women could overthrow governments armed only with sarcasm and cabbage. Outside the market hall, evening settles over the streets. Lamps glow against damp pavement while tram bells continue ringing through the smoky air. Horse carts still rattle past, carrying late deliveries. Snow threatens somewhere above the rooftops, though none has fallen yet. You carry a paper-wrapped sausage and a small loaf of bread while walking slowly through the crowd. Warm food steams gently in the cold air. Nearby, church bells begin ringing the hour. And suddenly Berlin feels less harsh for a moment. The markets soften the city somehow. People laugh here, argue here, taste things, trade stories, complain about prices, admire fresh apples, flirt badly beside pickle barrels. Daily life reveals itself most honestly around food. Behind the grand speeches about empire and industry, ordinary Berlin still depends on women choosing potatoes carefully, workers buying bread after long shifts, children begging for sweets, and vendors shouting themselves hoarse beneath flickering lamps. The city may dream about modernity, but tonight it smells mostly of sausage smoke, wet wool, mustard, and fresh bread cooling slowly in your hands as darkness settles across the capital. Evening settles over Berlin in layers. First, the sky darkens above the chimneys, then lamps begin glowing behind apartment windows, then the taverns fill. You follow the sound before you even see the beer hall itself. Laughter rolls through the cold air beneath the bursts of conversation and clinking glasses. Somebody sings badly inside, somebody else appears determined to sing even worse. The doorway opens briefly, and warm air rushes outward carrying tobacco smoke, roasted meat, wet wool, spilled beer, and the unmistakable smell of too many exhausted people finally sitting down. Honestly, it smells comforting. You step inside carefully. The room glows amber beneath gas lamps hanging low over crowded wooden tables. Waitresses weave through narrow aisles carrying heavy trays stacked with beer steins, while men in caps and dark coats lean shoulder to shoulder across benches. Berlin works hard during the day and drinks hard afterward. Beer halls form a major part of urban social life throughout Imperial Germany. Workers gather after factory shifts. Clerks meet friends after office hours. Veterans exchange stories. And political groups hold noisy discussions over mugs of lager. Some taverns attract artists or students. Others belong almost entirely to local workers from nearby streets. Every neighborhood develops favorites. The floor beneath your boots feels sticky from decades of spilled beer and questionable decisions. Smoke curls thickly beneath the ceiling. Cigars glow red through the haze while conversations overlap into one enormous human murmur. You find space near the back beside a tiled stove radiating welcome warmth. A waitress arrives without wasting time on unnecessary smiles. Berlin service culture in 1910 values efficiency far more than emotional theatre. You order beer. It arrives quickly in a thick glass mug heavy enough to qualify as exercise equipment. German brewing traditions by this period enjoy international fame. Lager beer especially dominates urban tavern culture, and Berliners consume astonishing quantities of it across the city every week. Brewing companies expand rapidly during these years, while beer halls become central gathering places for social life and political discussion. The first sip tastes cold, bitter, and deeply earned after a long day in the smoky city. Nearby, workers loosen collars and settle into conversation. One man complains about factory supervisors with poetic bitterness. Another insists Berlin trams become slower every year despite technological progress. A third argues loudly that no civilized nation should charge current sausage prices. Revolutions have probably started from less. At another table, university students wearing caps and formal jackets debate philosophy while trying to appear intellectual in front of young women nearby. Their confidence seems directly connected to beer intake. A curious custom among certain German student groups involved ceremonial drinking rituals with elaborate rules, songs, and absurd quantities of alcohol. Some fraternities even practiced formal dueling traditions that left dramatic facial scars considered marks of honor. Nothing says educated gentlemen quite like voluntarily turning your face into a fencing accident. The room grows louder as evening deepens. Somebody begins singing an old folk tune. Others join gradually, though not always in the same key. Glasses knock against tables. Chairs scrape wooden floors. Outside, snow finally begins drifting through the Berlin streets in thin, pale flakes. Inside feels warmer by comparison. One detail frequently noted by visitors to pre-war Berlin was the sheer density of tavern culture. Beer halls, wine rooms, cafes, dance establishments, and neighborhood pubs appeared everywhere across the city. Social drinking cut across class boundaries, though wealthier Berliners preferred more refined venues than the smoke-filled halls of working districts. You watch a waiter balancing 6 full mugs through the crowd with miraculous precision. The entire room parts instinctively to let him pass. He carries himself with the concentration of a battlefield surgeon. Years of tavern work apparently grant supernatural balance. At the far end of the hall, several veterans sit beneath framed military portraits discussing army life. Their moustaches alone could probably invade neighbouring countries. Military pride remains woven deeply into Berlin culture. Toasts to the Kaiser still appear regularly in public drinking spaces, though not everyone participates with equal enthusiasm. Researchers continue disagreeing about how unified German society truly felt beneath these patriotic displays. Public rituals projected confidence and loyalty, yet divisions involving class, religion, and politics remain sharp beneath the surface. Beer temporarily softens many arguments. Temporarily. You order a plate of sausages with mustard and dark bread while listening to conversations drift around the room. Politics blends with sports, wages, gossip, and neighbourhood complaints. Men discuss new electric streetlights. Someone mentions an airship exhibition with near-religious excitement. Somebody else predicts modern technology will soon eliminate most manual labour. That prediction ages magnificently poorly. Smoke thickens steadily near the ceiling until the gas lamps appear wrapped in fog, by modern standards. The air quality inside this beer hall could probably stun livestock, yet nobody seems concerned. Cigarettes pass constantly between fingers. Cigars glow like tiny furnaces. Pipes release sweet, heavy tobacco scents into the room. A wonderfully odd report from the era describes tavern regulars developing favourite personal mugs, stored permanently behind certain bars. Some became fiercely protective of these designated drinking vessels, and reportedly argued over them with startling intensity. Human beings love assigning emotional meaning to objects designed mainly for fermented liquids. The waitress returns carrying more beer for nearby tables, while expertly ignoring flirtation attempts from half the room. Working women in taverns navigate exhausting social territory, long hours, crowded rooms, smoke-filled air, and constant attention from customers become part of the job. Still, these spaces also provide independence and wages unavailable to many women elsewhere. Outside the windows, Berlin continues moving through the snowy evening. Trams spark past beneath street lamps. Horses stamp impatiently beside carts. Factory workers hurry home carrying bread and newspapers through the cold. Inside, though, time softens slightly. The stove crackles. Beer foams gently inside thick glasses. Voices blend into one sleepy rolling rhythm. For a little while, the pressures of schedules, factories, rent payments, and smoky stairwells fade into warmth and conversation. Ordinary Berliners carve out comfort where they can find it, and tonight, comfort arrives in the form of hot sausages, loud songs, tobacco haze, and enough beer to make tomorrow morning feel deeply unfair. Morning arrives too quickly after the beer hall. Berlin schools do not care whether you stayed out singing patriotic songs beside a tiled stove until late evening. Education begins early, strictly, and with very little sympathy for tired children. You walk through narrow streets dusted with yesterday's snow while groups of students hurry towards school buildings, carrying satchels and books beneath thick scarves. Their boots crunch sharply over frozen pavement. Breath rises pale into the cold air. Nobody looks delighted about arithmetic. School occupies a serious place in Imperial German society. Education is not viewed merely as personal improvement. It is considered preparation for disciplined citizenship, efficient labour, and national strength. Teachers command authority with almost military confidence. And honestly, many classrooms feel only one step removed from army training. You approach a large brick school building where children gather in organised lines before entering. Boys wear caps and dark jackets. Girls arrive with neatly braided hair and carefully mended coats. Clothing matters here too. Families often struggle financially to keep children appearing respectable at school because teachers and neighbours notice everything, A respected historical observation about Germany before the First World War is that literacy rates had risen impressively compared to earlier generations. Public education expanded significantly during the 19th century, and many Germans took pride in the nation's schools, universities, and scientific institutions, of course. Being proud of education and enjoying school are entirely different emotional experiences. A bell rings sharply through the courtyard. Immediately the lines tighten. Children straighten posture with remarkable speed. You enter the building behind them and smell chalk dust, wet wool, ink, soap, and coal heat from iron stoves placed along the corridors. Boots scrape floors. Teachers move through hallways with stern expressions suggesting joy itself requires official permission. Inside classrooms, rows of wooden desks face blackboards beneath portraits of the Kaiser and educational charts. Windows fog slightly from body heat. Students sit upright with hands folded or notebooks prepared. Silence arrives fast. One fascinating detail from school life during this period is the emphasis placed on memorization and recitation. Children learned long passages, mathematical tables, grammar rules, and religious instruction through repetition spoken aloud in groups. Entire classrooms sometimes answered questions in unison with eerie precision. It sounds slightly like a polite cult devoted to multiplication. You watch a teacher begin lessons with rigid efficiency. Questions fire across the room rapidly. Students rise before speaking. Mistakes attract correction immediately. Discipline remains central to educational philosophy in Imperial Germany. Teachers expect obedience, punctuality, neat handwriting, and sustained concentration. Children learn structure as much as information. Some students thrive under this system. Others appear permanently terrified of spelling errors. A small boy near the front struggles through a reading exercise while classmates stare forward very carefully, pretending enormous relief that somebody else currently suffers. The teacher corrects pronunciation sharply but not cruelly. Corporal punishment still exists in many schools, though practices vary depending on institution and teacher. Debates among historians continue regarding how authoritarian German classrooms truly were before the war. Some memoirs describe severe discipline and emotional distance. Others recall dedicated teachers who genuinely encouraged curiosity and academic ambition. Memory, unfortunately, edits childhood according to mood. Girls and boys often receive somewhat different educational expectations. Boys are pushed towards civic duty, military service, technical skills, or professional careers. Girls learn academic subjects too, but domestic training and moral instruction remain heavily emphasized. Society imagines very different futures for them. You move quietly into another classroom where older students study geography. Maps of Europe hang across the walls with Germany positioned proudly at the center. Colonial territories appear coloured brightly despite being very far away from Berlin itself. National pride enters education constantly through lessons, ceremonies, and textbooks. A teacher points toward overseas possessions while discussing trade and imperial strength. Several students look interested. Several look sleepy. One appears spiritually absent. School children have always mastered the art of staring directly at information while mentally visiting another dimension. Outside during break time, the courtyard erupts instantly into noise. Boys chase each other through patches of snow while girls cluster in smaller groups discussing classmates and teachers. Sandwiches emerge from satchels. Scarves unravel. Somebody slips on ice and receives immediate public humiliation from friends. Childhood survives even inside discipline systems. An amusing report from pre-war Berlin describes students secretly passing illustrated joke cards beneath desks during lessons. Teachers confiscated them regularly, which only increased their popularity. Apparently, even heavily structured classrooms cannot fully defeat boredom combined with imagination. You stand near a stove warming your hands while older students discuss future careers nearby. One hopes to become an engineer because modern machinery fascinates him. Another expects to enter military service. A girl quietly mentions teaching as a possible future profession. Berlin in 1910 believes deeply in progress through education, scientific achievement, industrial skill, disciplined administration. The empire sees schools as engines producing capable citizens for a modern nation. Universities in Germany enjoy global respect during this period, attracting scholars and students from many countries. Yet ordinary classrooms still contain ordinary realities: cold fingers, leaking ink pens, anxiety before examinations, children staring longingly out windows at falling snow. One question still examined by scholars concerns how much schools successfully shaped loyalty to empire and authority before 1914. Patriotic education certainly existed, but students also absorbed influences from family life, religion, class identity, and the rapidly changing urban world around them. No teacher completely controls what children become. The afternoon lessons continue beneath weak winter light. Chalk taps across blackboards. Pages rustle softly, somewhere in the hallway. Boots echo against tile floors and beyond the school walls. Berlin keeps moving. Factories roar, trams spark, markets bustle. Beer halls prepare for evening crowds once again. But inside these classrooms, another future quietly forms through memorized lessons, strict routines, nervous recitations, and children learning how to navigate a city and an empire already racing toward a century none of them can yet imagine. By late afternoon, Berlin turns into a city of mirrors, shop windows, polished boots, and careful appearances. You notice it everywhere once your attention shifts toward clothing. Men pause outside storefront glass to straighten collars or adjust hats. Women brush snow from sleeves before entering cafes or tramcars. Even factory workers heading home attempt to clean coal dust from coats before crossing into busier districts. In Berlin, appearance quietly announces who you are, where you belong, and perhaps where you hope to climb next. You walk along a commercial boulevard where department store windows glow warmly against the winter dusk. Mannequins display elegant dresses beneath electric lamps. Gloves, hats, canes, perfumes, leather shoes, and tailored jackets sit carefully arranged behind spotless glass. The city sells ambition beautifully. Fashion in pre-war Berlin reflected rigid social distinctions, though styles also changed rapidly as urban middle classes expanded. Clothing carried enormous symbolic meaning: fabrics, cuts, hats, jewellery, shoes, and even walking posture helped people identify class, profession, education, and respectability almost instantly. A skilled Berliner could apparently judge your entire economic future from your overcoat. You stop beside a hat shop where rows of bowlers, flat caps, and formal top hats rest like silent social categories waiting for human heads. Men rarely appear outdoors bareheaded. Hats signal adulthood and dignity. A proper hat matters nearly as much as proper shoes. Nearby, women crowd around a department store display featuring Paris-inspired dresses with narrow waists and elaborate decoration. Fashion magazines circulate increasingly among middle-class households during these years, spreading trends rapidly across European cities. Not everyone can afford elegance, but many people try to imitate pieces of it. An intriguing little detail from the era involves detachable shirt collars. Men often owned separate collars that could be cleaned and replaced more easily than entire shirts. Laundry costs and appearance concerns made detachable collars surprisingly practical. Unfortunately, they also look profoundly uncomfortable. You continue through the evening crowds while snowflakes drift slowly beneath electric streetlights. Couples walk arm in arm past cafes. Officers in polished boots move confidently through the sidewalks. Young clerks carry themselves with exaggerated seriousness. As though posture alone might produce promotion opportunities, respectability becomes performance. Berlin's growing middle class embraces etiquette manuals, proper manners, formal visiting customs, and carefully controlled public behaviour. Families worry intensely about reputation. Daughters must appear respectable. Sons must appear disciplined. Public embarrassment carries real social consequences. Some households probably maintain entire emotional economies based on neighbours not gossiping. You pass a tailor shop where a man stands inside being measured with grave concentration, while pins glitter between the tailor's lips. Tailors remain essential figures in urban life. Ready-made clothing grows more common during this period, especially through department stores. But custom tailoring still carries prestige. Good tailoring suggests stability, wealth, control. Things Berliners desperately admire. A social commentator writing before the war once observed that Berliners dressed not merely for comfort, but for social survival inside an increasingly crowded and competitive city. Clothing allowed individuals to project seriousness in a world moving faster every year. Meanwhile, everyone secretly freezes together at tram stops. You enter a department store briefly to escape the cold. Warmth surrounds you instantly, along with perfume, polished wood, electric lighting, and the faint rustle of expensive fabric. Elevators astonish customers. Glass counters gleam beneath chandeliers. Saleswomen move carefully through elegant aisles. Department stores become symbols of modern urban life throughout Germany during these years. They offer enormous selections of goods under one roof, attracting shoppers from multiple social classes and transforming consumer culture dramatically. Traditional shopkeepers dislike them intensely. Some conservatives even complain that department stores encourage dangerous levels of female independence because women can wander publicly through commercial spaces without male supervision. Imagine fearing curtains because they might inspire revolution. You watch middle-class women examine gloves and cosmetics while discussing prices quietly. Fashionable appearance requires effort far beyond simply purchasing clothing. Hair must be arranged correctly, gloves cleaned, hats protected from weather, boots polished constantly against Berlin mud. Women's fashion especially demands patience bordering on sainthood. Corsets remain common despite increasing criticism from reformers who argue they damage health and restrict movement. Looser reform clothing movements begin appearing among progressive circles, though mainstream fashion still favours structured silhouettes. One physician from the period dramatically warned that modern women's hats caused neck strain due to their enormous size and decoration. Humanity has apparently always found creative ways to injure itself through style. Back outside. Evening traffic thickens once again. Electric lights reflect beautifully across wet cobblestones while trams spark through the snowy dark. Berlin after sunset feels theatrical. Shop windows glow like tiny stages where citizens perform versions of themselves through coats, scarves, gloves, and polished walking sticks. You notice how differently various districts dress. Working neighbourhoods favour durable wool, dark coats, sturdy boots, and practical scarves. Wealthier western districts display finer fabrics, elegant furs, silk details, and fashionable tailoring. Students cultivate intellectual untidiness carefully enough to still appear intentional. Even rebellion requires coordination. Researchers still discuss how rapidly consumer culture altered social identity in cities like Berlin before the First World War. Access to cheaper manufactured goods allowed some working and lower middle-class families to imitate elite fashions more easily than earlier generations. Appearance becomes slightly more democratic. Anxiety about appearance becomes dramatically more democratic. A young woman passes wearing a fashionable hat decorated with feathers while balancing carefully across icy pavement. Behind her, a servant girl carries packages wrapped in brown paper through the snow. Two different worlds moving through the same illuminated street. And everywhere, mirrors, barbershop mirrors, storefront mirrors, cafe mirrors, apartment mirrors reflecting tired faces preparing for tomorrow. Berlin teaches people to observe themselves constantly, to adjust collars, Straighten posture, clean boots, hide exhaustion behind respectable presentation. The city rewards appearances because appearances suggest discipline, and discipline sits near the centre of Imperial German identity. Still, beneath the polished shoes and winter coats, everybody remains equally human, cold, hungry, tired, hopeful, walking home through snow beneath the electric lights, trying to look composed while secretly wondering whether the rent, the future, and the world itself might become slightly harder next year. Night changes Berlin completely. The city that looked grey and industrial beneath winter daylight suddenly glows gold, white, and electric beneath the darkness. Reflections shimmer across wet streets while illuminated shop windows stretch long rectangles across the pavement. Tram wires sparkle overhead. Smoke drifts softly through the artificial light like moving fabric. You stand at a busy intersection and watch modernity flicker alive. Electric lighting spreads rapidly across Berlin during the years before the First World War. Major boulevards, department stores, theatres, cafes, railway stations, and wealthier neighbourhoods increasingly embrace electric illumination, transforming how citizens experience urban nightlife. The future arrives one glowing bulb at a time. Of course, the future also flickers occasionally, hums strangely, and probably electrocutes at least one overly curious engineer somewhere nearby. Crowds continue filling the streets despite the late hour. Couples stroll beneath the lamps while workers hurry home carrying wrapped packages and newspapers. Young clerks gather outside cafes trying to look sophisticated beside cigarette smoke. Streetcars rattle past with bright interiors glowing warmly against the snow. Berlin after dark feels theatrical in a way daytime never does. You move along a commercial avenue lined with department stores whose enormous windows shine like magical portals into a cleaner, richer world. Inside, displays of furniture, dresses, clocks, perfumes, and modern appliances attract evening crowds eager simply to look. Shopping itself becomes entertainment. One newspaper columnist from the period complained dramatically that Berliners spent too much time wandering beneath the electric lights admiring unnecessary luxuries. Moral panic apparently adapts beautifully to new technology. You stop outside a cinema where posters advertise moving pictures. Crowds gather beneath the entrance canopy, stamping snow from boots, while discussing actors and scenes from recent films. Motion pictures remain relatively new and astonishing for many audiences. Watching images move across screens still carries a faint feeling of scientific sorcery. Children especially stare with complete wonder. A small but revealing detail from early cinema culture is that some audiences reportedly screamed, laughed, or ducked instinctively during dramatic scenes because moving images felt so startlingly real compared to older forms of entertainment. Humanity's first response to technology consistently appears to be mild panic. You enter the theatre lobby briefly and feel overwhelmed by warmth, perfume, tobacco smoke, damp wool, and excitement. Men remove hats. Women straighten gloves and collars. Ushers guide customers towards seats beneath electric chandeliers. The city's nightlife increasingly revolves around light itself. Bright cafes, bright theatres, bright advertisements, bright streets that make evening feel less dangerous and more alive. Urban historians often describe this period as a turning point when artificial illumination fundamentally altered daily rhythms. Night no longer belonged entirely to darkness and sleep. Cities extended themselves deeper into evening through entertainment, commerce, and transport networks. Berlin begins staying awake later. Not everybody approves. Traditional critics warn that modern nightlife encourages moral decline, overstimulation, and unhealthy habits. Some doctors even claim excessive electric light damages nerves or exhausts the brain. Meanwhile, ordinary Berliners mostly seem thrilled not to trip over things in the dark. You continue past cafes where orchestras play softly behind fogged windows. Elegant restaurants glow beneath polished brass lamps, while waiters glide between tables carrying wine and elaborate desserts. These spaces belong mainly to wealthier citizens. Though middle-class Berliners increasingly participate in urban nightlife too, the city feels layered after dark. Workers drinking beer in smoky taverns, students arguing philosophy in cafes, wealthy couples attending opera performances, street vendors still selling hot chestnuts beside tram stops, everyone moving through the same illuminated streets beneath drifting snow. One especially charming oddity from pre-war Berlin involved electric advertising signs that fascinated crowds simply because they flashed or moved mechanically. Citizens reportedly gathered just to watch glowing advertisements switch colours or animate repeatedly. Imagine being emotionally overwhelmed by a blinking soap advertisement. You cross a bridge over the dark Spree River where lights ripple softly across black water. Factories still operate in the distance. Steam rises from rooftops. Somewhere far away, a train whistle echoes through the night. Berlin never truly sleeps anymore. That transformation feels important somehow. Gas lamps still survive in many districts, casting softer yellow pools across quieter streets, but electric light carries a different emotional energy. Sharper, whiter, more confident. It suggests progress, science, control over darkness itself, at least until the power fails. A discussion that still appears frequently in studies of urban modernization concerns whether electric lighting genuinely improved public safety or mainly created the feeling of modern order. Crime certainly continued. Poverty certainly remained. Yet brightly lit streets encourage people to experience the city differently. Darkness lost territory. You pass a bookstore still open late where customers browse beneath glowing lamps. Newspapers and magazines spread new ideas rapidly through Berlin society. Politics, literature, science, fashion, socialism, nationalism, psychology, aviation. The city absorbs information constantly. Modern urban life becomes increasingly mental as well as physical. Too many newspapers, too many advertisements, too many opinions arriving at once. Some intellectuals celebrate this energy enthusiastically. Others worry industrial cities overstimulate the human mind beyond healthy limits. Honestly, after surviving Berlin traffic, your nerves probably surrendered hours ago. Snow continues falling gently now. It softens the sound of hoofbeats and muffles distant wheels against cobblestones. The electric lights reflect beautifully through the flakes while steam drifts upward from street grates into the cold night air. For a moment, the city almost looks peaceful. Then a tram screeches around the corner, throwing sparks overhead and reminding everyone that Berlin remains deeply committed to noise. Still, there is wonder here too. Ordinary people who grew up with candles and gaslight now walk beneath glowing electric avenues. Children stare into cinema screens. Shop windows shine late into winter evenings. Cafes hum with conversation long after sunset. The Empire believes technology will solve nearly everything, and tonight, beneath thousands of glowing lamps stretching across the snowy capital, it becomes very easy to understand why so many Berliners truly believe the modern future has already arrived. The farther west you travel through Berlin, the quieter the streets become. Not silent, never silent. This city always rattles somewhere in the distance, but the noise softens. Wheels roll more smoothly along cleaner roads. Apartment blocks grow wider and brighter. Windows appear larger. Trees line certain avenues in neat rows dusted with snow. Money changes the sound of a city. You leave behind crowded courtyards and smoky worker districts and move into neighborhoods where wealthy families live behind polished doors and lace curtains. Here the air smells less of coal dust and cabbage and more of perfume, cigar smoke, polished wood, and expensive soap. Even the horses look better fed. Berlin before the First World War contains dramatic contrasts between social classes. Industrial growth creates enormous fortunes for businessmen, bankers, industrialists, senior officials and professionals. Wealthier districts develop elegant apartment houses with spacious rooms, private bathrooms, electric lighting, and servants' quarters. Luxury in 1910 often means somebody else carries the coal upstairs for you. You pause outside a grand apartment building where lamps glow warmly beside the entrance. A uniformed doorman opens the heavy front door while snow gathers softly on the sidewalk outside. Inside, carpets mute footsteps. Brass railings shine beneath electric chandeliers. The building itself seems calmer than poorer neighbourhoods. Fewer children shouting, fewer arguments through walls, fewer smells fighting each other in stairwells. You climb carefully upward and notice how different these apartments feel from the crowded Mietskazerne buildings you visited earlier. Hallways widen, ceilings rise higher. Furniture appears decorative instead of purely functional. Paintings hang on walls for beauty rather than because someone needed to cover damp stains. And yet beneath all this elegance, another invisible workforce moves constantly. Servants, maids, cooks, laundry girls, nannies, chauffeurs. Households of the upper and middle classes rely heavily on domestic labour before the war. Many young women migrate from villages and smaller towns into Berlin seeking employment in wealthy homes. Service offers wages, meals, and housing, though usually at the cost of privacy, independence, and exhausting hours. And the grand apartment upstairs only functions because somebody downstairs wakes before dawn. You pass a kitchen doorway where servants prepare dinner beneath bright gaslight. Pots simmer, knives chop steadily against wooden boards. Steam fogs the windows while a cook directs younger workers with military authority. Cooking in wealthy households becomes performance as much as nourishment. Several courses, proper presentation, correct wine pairings, tiny decorative parsley arrangements pretending vegetables are festive. One amusing household guide from the era advised servants never to reveal exhaustion physically in front of guests because visible fatigue supposedly disturbed refined dining atmospheres. Human beings have always expected luxury to appear magically rather than through labour. A maid carrying folded linens slips past you quickly with eyes lowered. Servants in Berlin households often occupy strange social territory. They live intimately beside employers while remaining socially distant. They overhear family secrets, financial worries, private arguments, romantic affairs, and political discussions. Invisible witnesses in black dresses and white aprons. A number of personal diaries from this period reveal that servants sometimes worked 14 or 16-hour days with limited free time. Sundays off might exist in theory more than reality depending on the household. Yet many young women still preferred domestic service to dangerous factory work or crushing rural poverty. Choice becomes complicated when every option involves exhaustion. You enter a formal sitting room glowing beneath electric lamps and immediately notice the silence. Thick carpets absorb sound, curtains block street noise, shelves display books nobody appears currently reading. A piano waits elegantly near the window. The wealthy can purchase distance from urban chaos, at least partially. A point frequently explored by historians is how Berlin's upper classes balanced enthusiasm for modernity with fear of social unrest. Wealthy citizens enjoyed electric lighting, automobiles, department stores, and scientific progress while simultaneously worrying about strikes, socialism, labour movements, and the rapidly growing urban masses surrounding them. The empire feels confident from a distance. Closer up, many people remain nervous. You watch a formal dinner begin inside the apartment. Guests remove gloves carefully before taking seats around a polished table beneath candlelight and electric lamps mixed together. Conversation turns toward politics, theatre, military appointments, and the newest architectural projects in the capital. Servants move silently around them, refilling glasses and changing plates. One particularly strange fashion among elite households involved elaborate calling card etiquette. Visitors left decorative cards announcing social calls, and households tracked proper responses with near-diplomatic precision. Entire friendships apparently depended on whether somebody acknowledged cardboard quickly enough. Modern texting arguments suddenly seem less tragic. Outside the windows, snow continues falling over Berlin. Trams still spark through poorer districts. Workers still crowd beer halls. Laundry still dries beside smoky stoves. But here, behind velvet curtains, the city appears softer. A young daughter practices piano reluctantly while her mother corrects posture nearby. A father reads newspapers discussing international tensions and naval expansion. Guests sip wine beside glowing lamps while discussing vacations, art exhibitions, and politics. The servants continue working through all of it, polishing silver, carrying coal, serving tea, cleaning dishes after midnight. One revealing social observation from the period noted that many middle-class families hired servants not merely for practical help, but as visible proof of status. Even households with strained finances sometimes employed maids because respectability demanded it. Nothing empties a budget faster than trying to look richer than your neighbours. You eventually descend back toward the snowy streets, where the cold air feels sharper after the warmth upstairs. Through apartment windows, you glimpse countless private worlds unfolding simultaneously across Berlin. Elegant dining rooms, tiny kitchens, servants ironing late into the night, children asleep beneath heavy quilts, families arguing quietly over money, officers drinking brandy, maids scrubbing pans while orchestras play softly in distant parlours. The city contains all of it together, and somewhere beneath the polished manners, expensive carpets, and glowing chandeliers of Berlin's wealthy districts, ordinary human labour still keeps the fires burning, the food hot, the floors clean, and the illusion of effortless elegance alive for one more winter evening, no matter where you walk in Berlin. The military eventually appears. Sometimes it arrives dramatically with brass bands, polished cavalry horses, and marching formations moving through broad avenues beneath fluttering flags. Sometimes it appears quietly in the form of a young officer reading newspapers in a cafe, or a reservist wearing an old uniform coat on the tram home, but it is always there. Imperial Germany in 1910 breathes military culture almost unconsciously. Soldiers belong to the landscape of everyday life as naturally as trams, smoke, or church bells. The empire takes enormous pride in discipline, organisation, and armed strength, and Berlin reflects that confidence constantly. You hear marching before you see it. Boots strike pavement in perfect rhythm somewhere ahead, while pedestrians step aside automatically. Shopkeepers pause in doorways. Children hurry toward the curb for a better view. Then the soldiers appear. Grey uniforms, polished buttons, leather belts pulled tight across heavy coats, Pickelhaube helmets shining beneath the winter sun. The formation moves through the snowy street with mechanical precision, while officers ride beside them on horseback. Steam rises from the animals' nostrils into the cold air. Drums echo sharply between buildings. People watch with a mixture of admiration, habit, and resignation. Military service shapes male life across much of German society before the war. Conscription requires young men to spend years in the army, followed by reserve duties afterward. Uniforms therefore carry social prestige because millions of citizens either served already or expect to serve eventually. Even civilian posture sometimes resembles parade ground training. A newspaper writer from the period joked that Berliners lined up for bread with greater discipline than some foreign armies. You follow the crowd toward a square where soldiers continue drilling despite the cold. Commands crack through the air while officers inspect formations carefully. The entire scene feels intensely choreographed. Precision matters here. The German army develops a reputation across Europe for organisation and professionalism during these decades. Military parades, public ceremonies, patriotic holidays, and veterans' organisations all reinforce the connection between national identity and military strength. And yet daily military life often involves extraordinary boredom. One former conscript later recalled spending endless hours polishing boots, folding blankets, cleaning equipment, and standing still while officers discussed discipline at terrifying length. Apparently empires run partly on paperwork and partly on shoe maintenance. You pass a group of schoolboys enthusiastically imitating the marching soldiers, with sticks balanced like rifles across their shoulders, nearby. An older veteran wearing medals watches quietly from a bench. Military imagery reaches deep into childhood culture. Toy soldiers, patriotic songs, school exercises, adventure stories, and public ceremonies all normalize martial values. Yet many ordinary Berliners also joke about officers relentlessly. Respect and mockery coexist comfortably. A subject still debated among historians concerns how eager ordinary Germans truly felt about military culture before 1914. Public patriotism certainly flourished, especially during ceremonies and national celebrations. Yet socialist workers, intellectual critics, religious minorities, and some liberals expressed unease about aggressive nationalism and expanding military influence. Berlin contains many opinions hidden beneath official pageantry. You enter a cafe where several officers sit together near the window drinking coffee and reading newspapers. Their uniforms attract attention immediately. Civilian men glance toward them with combinations of admiration and envy, while waitresses move especially carefully around the table. Officers occupy elevated social status in Imperial Germany. The profession carries prestige connected not only to military authority, but also to aristocratic traditions and ideals of masculine honour. Some officers behave elegantly. Others behave like men who recently discovered shoulder decorations and became emotionally overwhelmed by the experience. One remarkably strange practice associated with military and student culture during this period involved formal duels fought over insults or matters of honour. Facial scars from these encounters sometimes became symbols of courage and status among certain social groups. Nothing says civilized society quite like dramatically slicing each other over dinner arguments. Outside again, you notice military advertisements pasted beside theatre posters and commercial signs. Recruitment imagery celebrates strength, duty, and sacrifice. Newspapers discuss naval expansion and international rivalry with growing intensity. Germany's naval build-up before the war becomes a source of enormous national pride. Battleships symbolize modern power much the way electric lights symbolize scientific progress. Berliners follow naval news with fascination, even though the sea itself lies far away. The empire dreams in steel. You walk past barracks where soldiers stand guard beside gates dusted with snow. Smoke rises from chimneys while bugle calls echo faintly through the cold afternoon air. Young recruits move across the yard carrying equipment beneath the watchful eyes of instructors. Military life appears orderly from outside. Inside, it smells mostly of leather, wool, wet boots, tobacco, and too many men sharing close quarters. Several memoirs from former soldiers describe barracks humour as rough, repetitive, and obsessed with food. Complaints about soup quality apparently unite humanity across all historical periods. You stop near a newspaper kiosk where headlines discuss diplomatic tensions abroad. France, Britain, naval competition, alliances shifting uneasily across Europe. Most Berliners reading these stories cannot imagine the scale of destruction waiting only a few years ahead. The future still feels abstract. One scholar famously described pre-war Europe as sleepwalking toward catastrophe. Though others argue people at the time recognized dangers more clearly than later generations assumed. Either way, ordinary citizens continue buying bread, attending school, polishing boots, and riding trams beneath headlines about international rivalry. Daily life continues until suddenly it does not. The afternoon light fades slowly behind military buildings and church towers. Snow crunches beneath boots while officers disappear into cafes and soldiers march back toward barracks. And everywhere you look, Berlin carries signs of preparation. Uniforms, drills, flags, marching songs drifting through beer halls, children pretending sticks are rifles, a capital city proud of discipline and power, still believing strength guarantees security, still unaware how completely the coming war will transform those bright uniforms into symbols of grief for millions of ordinary families. Berlin women move constantly. You notice it more and more the longer you wander through the city. Women carrying market baskets through snowy streets. Women scrubbing laundry in crowded courtyards. Women typing in offices beneath electric lamps. Women rushing onto trams, teaching school children, serving beer in smoky halls, or hurrying home before dark through streets glittering with slush and light. The city depends on their labour while simultaneously insisting they remain graceful about it. You begin the morning beside a busy tram stop where women in long winter coats wait beneath drifting snow. Hats tilt carefully against the cold. Gloves clutch handbags and folded newspapers. A few younger women wear simpler, more practical clothing than older generations might approve of. Berlin fashion changes alongside urban life. A growing number of women in pre-war Germany enter paid employment, particularly in offices, shops, factories, education, domestic service, and textile work. Urbanization creates new opportunities. Though wages often remain lower than men's and social expectations continue pressing heavily toward marriage and domestic responsibility. Freedom arrives cautiously and usually carrying paperwork. You board a crowded tram where women occupy seats beside soldiers, clerks, workers, and elderly passengers wrapped tightly in scarves. The electric car jolts forward through the snowy avenue, while advertisements shake overhead. A young typist balances documents carefully on her lap, across from her. An older woman knits steadily despite the movement. Two shopgirls whisper together while trying not to laugh at a severe-looking officer near the door. Public space slowly changes during these years. Women move through Berlin more visibly than earlier generations often could. Department stores, offices, cafes, schools, and public transportation create new forms of urban independence. Yet the freedom remains incomplete and uneven. Many professions still exclude women entirely. Universities only gradually admit female students. Marriage laws favour husbands heavily. And society continues monitoring female behaviour with exhausting enthusiasm. One Berlin columnist from the period complained bitterly that modern young women walk too quickly, spoke too confidently, and spent too much time bicycling without proper concern for traditional femininity. The bicycle truly terrified conservative people in ways modern life can barely comprehend. You leave the tram near a commercial district where shopgirls arrange displays behind frosted windows. Their work requires endless standing, smiling, folding, carrying, organising, and pretending customers asking impossible questions are charming rather than exhausting. Retail employment expands rapidly in growing cities like Berlin. Department stores especially hire large numbers of women, often young and unmarried, to work long hours beneath electric lighting and strict supervision. A few employers even regulate hairstyles and facial expressions. Capitalism always finds exciting new ways to manage human beings inside a cafe. Several women sit together drinking coffee while discussing politics and literature. One wears practical reform clothing without a corset. Another carries pamphlets connected to women's organisations demanding educational access and legal reform. Movements advocating women's rights gain momentum in Germany during the early 20th century, especially in larger cities. activists campaigned for expanded education, employment opportunities, and eventually voting rights, though progress remains slow and controversial. Some Berliners view these changes as exciting signs of modern civilization. Others react as though civilization itself is collapsing because a woman purchased books independently. You continue walking through a quieter neighborhood where mothers pull children along icy sidewalks towards school. Domestic responsibility still shapes daily life for most women regardless of class. Cooking, cleaning, budgeting, childcare, sewing, laundry, and household management consume enormous amounts of time and physical effort. Urban modernization introduces new technologies and conveniences slowly. But many families still rely on manual labor for nearly everything. One household manual from the era advised wives to maintain cheerful emotional composure regardless of exhaustion, because husbands supposedly required calm domestic atmospheres after work. That advice definitely sounds written by somebody not currently carrying water upstairs. A particularly memorable cultural trend from pre-war Germany involved women's cycling clubs and outdoor recreation groups. Cycling represented mobility, health, and independence for many younger women, while critics warned dramatically that bicycles threatened social order and feminine modesty. Human history contains surprisingly large amounts of panic about women sitting on things. You pause beside a newspaper stand displaying headlines about politics, industry, and international tensions. Several women browse magazines focused on fashion, literature, housekeeping, and social issues. Print culture aimed at female readers grows steadily during this period. Ideas travel quickly through cities, so do anxieties. A debate still explored by historians centers on how deeply urban modernization transformed women's everyday freedom before the First World War. Some researchers emphasize expanding educational and professional opportunities in major cities like Berlin. Others point out how strongly traditional expectations continued shaping marriage, sexuality, work, and legal rights. Progress rarely marches in a straight line. It stumbles forward while arguing with itself. You enter a department store restaurant crowded with female shoppers, warming themselves beside steaming cups of coffee. The room buzzes with conversation beneath electric chandeliers. Elderly women in elaborate hats sit beside younger office workers with simpler practical clothing. Class differences remain visible even in shared public spaces. Yet everyone seems equally relieved to sit down for a while. Near the entrance, a pianist plays softly while snow drifts outside the windows. Waitresses move between tables carrying pastries and hot drinks. Women now occupy parts of city life that earlier generations might have considered inappropriate or inaccessible. Not fully equal, not fully free, but undeniably present. One observer visiting Berlin shortly before the war remarked with surprise at how modern the city's women appeared compared to older stereotypes about Germany. He described energetic office workers, university students, cyclists, journalists, and politically active women moving confidently through urban spaces. The future already walks these streets quietly. Outside again, evening begins settling across Berlin. Electric lamps glow along snowy avenues while trams rattle through slush. Women hurry home carrying parcels, children, groceries, documents, and responsibilities that never fully end. And through all the smoke, noise, pressure, and social expectation, they continue holding enormous parts of the city together, even while the empire around them still struggles to imagine how much the modern world is already changing beneath its polished uniforms and old assumptions. Berlin's air makes your throat hurt, not immediately. At first it simply feels heavy, smoky, and cold. Then, after enough hours moving through factories, tram traffic, coal fires, crowded apartments, and damp winter streets, you notice the cough. Everyone else notices it too. People clear throats constantly in this city. Smokers cough into handkerchiefs. Workers cough outside factories. Children cough in schoolrooms warmed by coal stoves. Elderly men cough beside beer hall doors while insisting they feel perfectly healthy. Industrial modernity arrives wrapped in soot. You walk through an early morning fog hanging low across the streets near the river, except it is not entirely fog. Smoke from factories and domestic chimneys mixes with damp winter air until the city feels wrapped inside grey wool. Street lamps glow weakly through the haze. Horses emerge from the mist like tired ghosts pulling delivery carts. Doctors in Berlin during the early 20th century increasingly worried about respiratory illness, poor urban air quality, overcrowded housing, and infectious disease. Tuberculosis especially haunted large cities across Europe and remained one of the leading causes of death before antibiotics transformed medicine decades later. People spoke about tuberculosis quietly, almost respectfully, as if loud voices might attract it. You pass a pharmacy window filled with glass bottles, powders, tonics, and mysterious remedies promising strength, calm nerves, improved digestion, or healthier lungs. Medical science advances rapidly during this era, particularly in Germany, where laboratories and universities lead important research in bacteriology and chemistry. Yet ordinary medical treatment still feels strangely caught between centuries. Scientific breakthroughs exist beside herbal syrups and home remedies involving alarming quantities of alcohol. One widely circulated household belief claimed fresh air and mountain climates could help tuberculosis patients recover. Wealthier families sometimes sent sick relatives to sanatoriums in the countryside or Alps, where patients rested beneath blankets on outdoor balconies regardless of freezing temperatures. Nothing says healing like medically supervised frostbite. You step inside a doctor's waiting room warmed by a coal stove ticking softly in the corner. Wooden chairs line the walls beside framed anatomical diagrams. Patients wait quietly beneath the smell of disinfectant, damp coats, and medicine. A mother holds a coughing child wrapped tightly in scarves. An elderly worker massages stiff hands darkened by years of labour. A young office clerk stares nervously at the floor while clutching his hat. Illness interrupts every class eventually. Berlin's rapid growth creates enormous pressure on sanitation systems, housing conditions, and public health services. Reformers campaign for cleaner water, improved sewers, better ventilation, and expanded hospitals throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The city improves significantly compared to earlier decades. It still smells deeply suspicious in many places. A physician finally calls a patient through heavy wooden doors, while the remaining visitors settle back into silence. Doctors occupy complicated positions in society during this period. Scientific medicine gains prestige rapidly. Yet many treatments remain limited or uncomfortable. If you develop pneumonia in 1910, your doctor mostly offers rest, warmth, observation, and worried facial expressions. You continue through the streets toward a public bathhouse where steam drifts from windows into the cold air. Many working-class apartments still lack private bathing facilities, making public baths important parts of urban hygiene. Inside, tiled rooms echo with splashing water and conversation. Towels hang beside rows of lockers. Men scrub themselves beside steaming pipes while attendants move through clouds of humid air carrying buckets and soap. A city of millions requires organised washing. One striking detail from municipal records reveals how strongly reformers connected cleanliness with morality during this period. Public hygiene campaigns promoted bathing, ventilation, sunlight, and orderly homes not only for health reasons but also as signs of respectable citizenship. Apparently dirt itself threatened the empire. You pass a newspaper vendor shouting headlines about new medical discoveries while nearby an old woman sells herbal remedies from a small street stall. Modern science and traditional medicine overlap constantly in Berlin life. Some people trust laboratories, others trust grandmother's onion syrup, Many trust both simultaneously. A medical observer writing shortly before the war described Berlin as a city obsessed equally with health and unhealthy habits. Gymnastics clubs, cycling groups, vegetarian restaurants, and nature movements grew increasingly popular even while citizens continued smoking heavily, drinking generously, and inhaling coal smoke daily. Human beings remain wonderfully inconsistent. You enter a small cafe where workers warm themselves beside fogged windows. Conversations drift toward illness quickly, because winter always brings waves of colds and influenza through crowded neighborhoods. One man insists beer prevents sickness. Another claims garlic works better. A third simply shrugs and lights another cigarette directly beneath a no-smoking sign. Researchers still examine how urban stress, industrial pollution, and crowded living conditions shaped health outcomes in cities like Berlin before the First World War. Mortality rates improved gradually in some areas due to sanitation reforms and medical advances, but major inequalities persisted between rich and poor districts. Wealth often purchased cleaner air, better food, and quieter housing. The body notices class differences even when politics pretend otherwise. Outside, the fog thickens again as trams rattle through the haze with glowing lamps. Snow turns grey quickly beside busy roads. Chimneys continue pumping smoke into the sky from every direction. Yet despite everything, Berliners keep moving. Children race through icy streets laughing between coughs. Workers hurry toward factories wrapped in scarves. Women carry baskets through markets. Doctors visit patients by carriage and tram. Life continues stubbornly through sickness and soot alike, and somewhere beneath all the smoke drifting across the rooftops of Imperial Berlin, millions of lungs breathe the same cold air while the city marches confidently toward a future modern enough to invent brilliant medical science, but not yet wise enough to stop poisoning itself quite so enthusiastically. Sunday changes Berlin's breathing. The city does not become silent exactly. Trams still rattle, church bells still ring across the rooftops. Somewhere a factory probably continues roaring because industrial machinery rarely respects spiritual rest. But the pace softens. For one day, many Berliners try to escape the pressure of smoke, schedules, crowded stairwells, and factory whistles. Families leave apartment blocks carrying baskets, blankets, sandwiches, and children wrapped in thick winter clothing. Streets leading toward parks, lakes, and rivers fill with people eager for fresh air, or at least air slightly less flavoured by coal. You join the Sunday crowds heading toward the outskirts of the city where the buildings thin gradually, and patches of frozen grass appear between snowy paths. Men carry walking sticks while women adjust scarves against the wind. Children run ahead despite repeated warnings not to step in icy puddles. Nobody listens. Excursions into nature become increasingly popular among Berliners during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Urban residents seek relief from industrial life through parks, forests, riverbanks, lakes, and organised hiking clubs. Railways and trams make these outings easier for ordinary citizens than earlier generations could imagine. The modern city accidentally invents a deep emotional need to touch trees occasionally. You pass groups boarding suburban trains packed tightly with laughing passengers, carrying picnic baskets and thermoses. Cigarette smoke drifts through the compartments, while windows fog from body heat. Everybody seems slightly happier once moving away from the city centre. A travel writer from the period observed that Berliners treated Sundays almost like temporary escape missions from urban existence. Even short journeys into nearby forests or lakeside villages could feel emotionally restorative after long work weeks in crowded districts. Honestly, after surviving Berlin traffic, a frozen tree probably feels spiritually healing. You arrive near the banks of the Spree where paths wind through bare winter trees dusted lightly with snow. The river moves dark and slow beneath grey skies while couples stroll quietly beside the water. Children throw stones toward thin ice despite adult objections. Old men feed birds from paper bags. Young lovers pretend they are not freezing. Nature remains deeply social. One especially charming trend from pre-war Germany involved organised walking clubs whose members explored forests and countryside together on weekends. Some groups focused on exercise and fresh air, others mixed hiking with singing. Political discussion or philosophical conversations about modern life. Human beings truly enjoy adding meetings to every activity imaginable. You continue toward a beer garden now quieter during winter, but still active beneath covered seating areas warmed by stoves. Families gather around tables drinking coffee or beer, while children chase each other between benches. The smell here differs completely from central Berlin. Wet earth, wood smoke, pine trees, cold river water, fresh bread and sausages warming beside iron stoves. For a few hours, the industrial city feels far away. Middle-class reform movements during this era often promoted outdoor recreation as healthy and morally beneficial. Physicians, teachers, and social reformers encourage sunlight, exercise, clean air, and time in nature as remedies for urban stress and overcrowded living conditions. They were probably correct, though judging by the amount of beer still involved, Berliners preferred balanced wellness programs. You walk deeper into a wooded area where snow crunches softly beneath boots. Conversations fade behind you until only distant laughter and church bells remain. The trees stand dark against the pale winter sky while your breath drifts upward in white clouds. For the first time in many sections of this story, you can hear almost nothing mechanical. No factory whistles, no pounding machines, no endless tram bells, just wind moving through branches. Several artists and intellectuals of the time wrote nostalgically about escaping Berlin's speed and noise through temporary retreats into nature. Industrial modernity fascinated them, but it also exhausted them. The contrast between city intensity and countryside calm became a recurring theme in literature, painting, and political thought. Even before the war, people already worried modern life moved too fast. A curious custom among some German hiking groups involved carrying elaborate picnic meals into forests complete with coffee equipment, pastries, and wine. Apparently nobody in Europe has ever accepted the idea that walking outdoors should involve simplicity. You stop near a frozen lakeside where skaters move cautiously across thick ice, while bundled spectators watch from shore. Children pull sleds through the snow. Vendors sell hot chestnuts and steaming drinks beside pathways. Winter recreation carries a cheerful stubbornness. The cold bites your face, your boots feel damp, yet everyone insists this counts as relaxation. You sit briefly on a bench overlooking the grey water, while smoke from distant Berlin drifts faintly along the horizon. The city never disappears entirely, even here. Miles from crowded tenements and electric boulevards. Factory chimneys remain visible in the distance. Modern life follows people outward. Some historians continue discussing whether these leisure activities genuinely crossed class boundaries or remained sharply divided by wealth and access. Working families certainly enjoyed parks and public outings, yet longer holidays and countryside travel remained easier for middle and upper classes with greater income and free time. Rest itself often depends on economics. As afternoon fades, families begin packing baskets and gathering scarves once more. Children complain about leaving. Parents promise hot soup waiting at home. Boots crunch steadily back toward stations and tram stops. Soon Berlin will pull everyone inward again. Back toward crowded apartments, back toward Monday schedules, back toward smoke and electric light. But for one winter Sunday beside frozen rivers and quiet trees, ordinary Berliners briefly step outside the machinery of the city and remember that beneath uniforms, factory routines, and crowded boulevards, human beings still crave silence, fresh air, companionship, and the deeply comforting illusion that life might slow down for just a few peaceful hours. Berlin becomes stranger after midnight, the respectable city of office clerks, polished officers, school teachers, and Sunday walkers does not disappear completely. It simply slips behind curtains while another version of the capital wakes beneath dim lamps and drifting smoke. You feel it first in the streets. The crowds thin, but the people remaining move differently, faster sometimes, more cautiously, a little less eager to meet each other's eyes. Snow turns grey beside alleyways where tavern light spills weakly across cobblestones. The city's shadows grow deeper after dark. You wander through narrower streets where beer halls give way to gambling rooms, dance establishments, cheap cafes, and backdoor taverns thick with cigarette smoke. Music drifts through open windows. Laughter bursts suddenly from unseen courtyards. Somewhere nearby, glass breaks, followed immediately by shouting. Berlin's nightlife before the First World War already carries a reputation for energy, experimentation, and vice, particularly in certain entertainment districts. Large cities naturally attract gambling, prostitution, drinking culture, underground politics, and every variety of human mischief. Modernity extends business hours for bad decisions too. A police officer passes beneath a gas lamp, boots striking sharply against the pavement while his eyes scan the street carefully. Law enforcement in Berlin spends enormous effort monitoring public morality. Political radicals, prostitution, gambling houses, and alcohol-related disorder, not always successfully. One police report from the era described officers raiding an illegal gambling room hidden behind a fake cigar shop wall. Apparently, Berlin criminals possessed both ambition and interior decorating skills. You step into a late-night cafe where the air hangs thick with tobacco and exhaustion. Men sit bent over newspapers while women in fashionable dresses laugh beside glasses of wine. A pianist plays softly near the back wall, though several keys sound permanently injured. The room smells like coffee, perfume, smoke, wet wool, and tired ambition. At one table, journalists argue politics beneath flickering lamps. At another, a pair of men play cards with expressions suggesting international diplomacy depends entirely on the next hand. Nearby, a woman in feathers and silk smokes elegantly while ignoring the attention surrounding her. Urban nightlife allows certain social boundaries to loosen temporarily. Respectable citizens enter questionable districts. Workers drink beside students. Artists mix with criminals. Lonely people search crowded rooms hoping not to remain lonely. Accounts from contemporary observers often describe Berlin nights as unusually energetic compared to many older European capitals. The city's rapid growth, expanding entertainment industry, and restless population created an atmosphere some visitors found thrilling and others deeply unsettling. Usually both at once. You continue through streets glowing faintly beneath gaslight, where dance halls advertise live music behind painted signs. Couples disappear through narrow entrances while carriage drivers wait outside, stamping cold feet against frozen pavement. Inside one dance hall, music spills outward in waves, violins, piano, laughter, chair legs scraping wooden floors. Women's dresses flash through cigarette haze while men attempt complicated dance steps with varying degrees of success. Human courtship apparently survives every historical era through a mixture of confidence and mild embarrassment. A curious trend among some urban nightlife venues involved themed costume evenings inspired by exotic foreign places. Historical fantasies or romanticized countryside traditions, guests dressed as sailors, aristocrats, peasants, or fictional characters while drinking heavily beneath paper decorations. Nothing says sophisticated empire quite like a banker pretending to be a pirate after 3 beers. You move deeper into the district where the streets grow quieter and less polished. Windows remain dark except for occasional red or yellow light behind curtains. Women stand beneath doorways watching passers-by carefully. Berlin authorities regulate prostitution heavily during this period, though the reality remains complicated and often harsh. Poverty, migration, limited employment options, and urban anonymity all contribute to the growth of the sex trade in large cities. Official morality and practical reality rarely agree for long. A horse carriage rattles past, carrying wealthy passengers wrapped in expensive coats, while nearby a homeless man sleeps against a wall beneath newspapers. The contrast feels sharp even in darkness. Berlin's prosperity never reaches everyone equally. One recurring argument among social reformers before the war concerned whether vice in the city resulted mainly from poverty, moral decline, rapid modernization, or simple human nature. Newspapers, churches, politicians, and police officials all offered different answers. Meanwhile, ordinary people continued making ordinary mistakes after midnight. You pause near a narrow alley where two policemen question a nervous young man beneath a lamp. Further down the street, a drunken argument erupts briefly before dissolving into laughter. Crime certainly exists in Berlin, though many offences remain small-scale and practical. Pickpocketing, fraud, illegal gambling, smuggling, petty theft. The occasional spectacularly foolish robbery attempt. One wonderfully absurd newspaper story from the period described thieves stealing an entire sausage cart overnight, only to become trapped later when one accomplice insisted on selling sausages publicly the next morning. Criminal genius has always existed on a spectrum. The cold deepens as night moves forward. Snow falls more steadily now, muting distant wheels and footsteps. Somewhere a church bell marks the hour through the darkness, and yet the city remains awake. Trains arrive. Taverns stay open. Police patrols continue through the streets. Newspapers print tomorrow's headlines. Workers begin early shifts before others have gone home. Scholars still debate how much Berlin's nightlife represented social liberation versus social anxiety before the war. Some saw urban entertainment culture as proof of modern freedom and creativity. Others viewed it as evidence that industrial society had become spiritually restless and morally unstable. Standing here beneath smoky lamps and drifting snow, it feels like both interpretations might be true simultaneously. You finally leave the darker streets behind and return toward broader avenues where electric lights glow more steadily. The city looks calmer here, respectable again, at least on the surface. But now you know another Berlin exists beneath the polished uniforms, department stores, and patriotic ceremonies. A restless nocturnal city of gamblers, dancers, lonely souls, tired policemen, secret meetings, smoke-filled cafes, and human desires that refuse to disappear simply because society prefers tidy appearances. Morning returns slowly after a long Berlin night. Snow melts into grey slush along the curbs while newspaper boys shout headlines through clouds of breath. Tram bells ring again, bakers lift shutters, factory whistles call workers back into motion. Yet today you drift toward a different part of the city. Not the factories, not the markets, not the military squares. You head instead toward cafes filled with smoke, arguments, and dangerous quantities of philosophy. Berlin before the First World War becomes one of Europe's great intellectual centres. Writers, painters, journalists, composers, architects, scientists, and political thinkers flood into the growing capital searching for opportunity, recognition, or simply affordable coffee and someone willing to listen to their opinions, mostly the opinions. You step inside a cafe near midday where the atmosphere feels dense with conversation. Cigarette smoke curls towards stained ceilings, while waiters carry tiny cups of coffee between crowded marble tables. Newspapers hang from wooden racks. ink stains fingers everywhere. Nobody here appears fully rested. Artists rarely do. At one table, young painters debate colour theory with expression suggesting civilization itself depends entirely on brush technique. Nearby, journalists argue about Parliament while a playwright scribbles furiously into a notebook, already overflowing with crossed-out ideas. The cafe functions as office, living room, political arena, an emotional refuge all at once. Observers from the era frequently remarked on Berlin's intense intellectual energy during these years. Universities expanded, publishing flourished, and artistic movements multiplied rapidly. The city attracted ambitious people eager to participate in modern culture, while Germany's scientific and industrial influence reached global prominence. Berlin begins thinking faster than it can comfortably process. You order coffee that arrives strong enough to wake entire philosophical schools. The waiter sets it down with the weary expression of a man who has listened to too many poets explain society incorrectly. At the next table, a woman wearing dark reform clothing discusses modern theatre with two students while gesturing dramatically through cigarette smoke. Women increasingly participate in artistic and intellectual life, despite social barriers that still restrict many professions and institutions. The city changes through conversation as much as through factories. One striking detail from cafe culture involved customers lingering for hours over a single drink while reading newspapers or debating politics. Owners tolerated this partly because intellectual crowds attracted prestige and regular business. Also, throwing philosophers into the snow probably created paperwork. A violinist somewhere near the back plays softly while snow taps against the windows. Outside, Berlin rushes onward through slush and smoke. Inside, time stretches strangely. Conversations drift between art, socialism, psychology, architecture, nationalism, and modern anxiety. Everyone seems simultaneously fascinated and worried by the future. German-speaking intellectual life during this period becomes deeply influenced by new ideas about the human mind, industrial society, sexuality, and modern identity. Scientific discoveries challenge older assumptions while artists experiment with forms that shock conservative audiences. Not all Berliners enjoy this transformation. Many traditional critics complain that modern art looks ugly, confusing, immoral, or unfinished. Newspapers publish furious attacks against experimental painters and playwrights. Some citizens genuinely fear cultural decline. Others simply cannot understand why the painting appears to contain 6 elbows and emotional suffering. You leave the cafe briefly and wander toward an art gallery where visitors study bold modern works beneath bright lamps. Some paintings show distorted city streets and nervous faces rather than calm landscapes or heroic historical scenes. The modern city begins painting itself honestly, uneasy, crowded, fast. A number of cultural historians later argued that Berlin's artistic movements reflected deep tensions inside industrial society before the war. Urban alienation, technological change, class conflict, and psychological uncertainty all influenced the emerging modern styles, though occasionally an artist probably just enjoyed confusing rich people. You overhear 2 critics debating whether modern architecture should abandon historical decoration entirely in favour of cleaner industrial forms. Nearby, a sculptor complains loudly about lack of funding while wearing a coat that appears personally offended by soap. Creative genius and laundry apparently maintain a complicated relationship. Back in the cafe district, political discussion grows louder as afternoon deepens. Socialist newspapers circulate beside conservative journals. Students debate empire, labour rights, military spending, women's education, and the meaning of modern civilization itself. Berlin does not merely consume ideas, it manufactures them aggressively. One peculiar social habit among intellectual circles involved reading poetry aloud in smoky cafes late into the evening, while audiences responded with applause. Arguments, or brutal mockery depending on quality and alcohol levels. Honestly, some modern internet comment sections would feel very familiar here. You stop beside a bookseller whose shop windows display philosophy texts, novels, scientific journals, and political pamphlets stacked tightly together. Literacy and publishing expand enormously during this era, allowing ideas to travel through urban society at remarkable speed. A clerk finishing factory work might read socialist theory at night. A housewife might follow serialized novels in newspapers. A student might spend entire wages on books while forgetting practical concerns like food. The city feeds minds and empties pockets simultaneously. A topic scholars continue exploring is whether Berlin before 1914 felt optimistic or anxious beneath its intellectual brilliance. Evidence points strongly in both directions. Scientific achievement and industrial success inspired enormous confidence. Yet many artists and thinkers also sensed instability beneath the surface of modern life. Too much speed, too much competition, too many machines and crowds pressing against the human mind. You notice that feeling even now while standing outside beneath the cold afternoon sky. Electric trams spark past medieval churches. Factory smoke drifts above art galleries. Uniformed officers walk beside radical students arguing about revolution. Berlin contains several centuries at once. As evening approaches again, cafe windows glow warmly through gathering snow. Inside, conversations continue beneath smoke and lamplight. Painters sketch, journalists write headlines. Philosophers argue over coffee gone cold hours ago. And somewhere in all this restless intellectual energy, the modern world slowly invents itself while hardly anyone notices how close it already stands to catastrophe. Berlin loves monuments. The city raises statues the way other places plant trees, everywhere you walk. Bronze generals stare sternly across squares, while stone emperors sit atop horses frozen forever in triumphant poses. Columns rise toward grey skies. Eagles spread iron wings above government buildings. Flags ripple from official balconies even in winter wind. The empire wants to be seen, and more importantly, remembered. You move through broad ceremonial avenues where architecture itself feels designed to impress, intimidate, and reassure simultaneously. Government ministries stretch behind enormous facades. Museums glow beneath domes and columns. Public buildings display carved symbols of strength, science, industry, and national destiny. Berlin before the war increasingly presents itself as the proud heart of a rising world power. The transformation happens quickly during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Germany's industrial production expands enormously. Railways spread. Universities gain international prestige. Chemical and electrical industries lead global innovation. Many citizens genuinely believe their nation stands at the forefront of modern civilization. Confidence hangs in the air almost as thickly as coal smoke. You walk beneath the Brandenburg Gate where carriages, trams, officers, workers, tourists, and vendors all pass beneath the same monumental arches. Snow gathers lightly along the stone while horses snort clouds into the cold air. The gate feels less like architecture and more like theatre scenery for a nation determined to appear important. Which, to be fair, it absolutely is. A travel diary from an English visitor described Berlin as a city obsessed with proving itself modern, disciplined, and powerful. Compared to older capitals like Paris or Vienna, Berlin still carried the restless energy of somewhere trying very hard to catch up and surpass everyone simultaneously. The entire city behaves like an ambitious younger sibling with factories. You continue toward Unter den Linden, where elegant buildings line the avenue beneath bare winter trees. Officers stride confidently past cafes, while government clerks hurry toward ministries carrying folders and briefcases. Street vendors sell newspapers, announcing industrial successes, political speeches, and naval achievements. The empire advertises itself constantly. Public ceremonies reinforce this atmosphere. Military parades, patriotic holidays, imperial anniversaries, and official speeches all help create a shared national identity across a rapidly changing society. Flags appear in windows, bands play marches in public squares, crowds gather for spectacles celebrating technology, military strength, and scientific progress. Mass politics increasingly depends on performance. One particularly extravagant custom involved illuminating important public buildings during celebrations with thousands of lights and decorations. Citizens reportedly gathered simply to admire government architecture, glowing against the night sky like enormous theatrical sets. Nothing calms political tension quite like aggressively decorative light bulbs. You stop near a monument surrounded by pigeons and schoolchildren sliding through snow. The statue honours military victory from earlier wars that helped unify Germany decades before. Teachers point toward inscriptions while students listen with varying levels of enthusiasm. National history becomes public scenery in Berlin. Every square tells stories about empire, victory, progress, and sacrifice. Yet daily life continues around the monuments in wonderfully ordinary ways. Children climb steps despite warnings. Workers eat lunches beside statues. Dogs ignore imperial symbolism completely. A municipal observer once complained that Berlin pigeons displayed insufficient patriotic respect for public monuments. That may be the most Berlin sentence ever written. You enter a museum warmed by radiators and crowded with visitors escaping the cold. Marble floors echo beneath boots, while paintings and sculptures celebrate heroic scenes from history and mythology. Germany invests heavily in museums, universities, libraries, and scientific institutions during this era. Education and culture become important components of national prestige. Berlin seeks recognition not only through military power and industry, but also through intellectual achievement. The empire wants to appear civilized, modern, and eternal all at once. A question still discussed by historians concerns whether Imperial Germany's public confidence before 1914 masked deeper insecurities about rapid modernization and international rivalry. The nation achieved extraordinary economic and scientific success, yet political tensions and social divisions remained significant beneath the surface. Great powers often shout loudest when trying to reassure themselves. Outside, again, afternoon light fades slowly across government buildings while snow turns to slush beneath heavy traffic. Electric trams spark beside horse carriages. Modern machines pass ancient statues. The city constantly blends old symbols with new technology. You pass newspaper kiosks displaying stories about aviation records, naval construction, colonial affairs, and industrial growth. Berliners live surrounded by narratives of expansion and achievement. Progress feels inevitable here. One charmingly bizarre public craze before the war involved collecting postcards featuring monuments, government buildings, military leaders, and technological wonders. Entire albums filled with patriotic urban imagery became popular souvenirs and household keepsakes. Human beings invented curated photo feeds long before telephones fit into pockets. You step briefly into a grand railway station where iron beams arch overhead through clouds of steam and smoke. Trains arrive carrying businessmen, soldiers, migrants, artists, and tourists from across the empire. Berlin stands at the center of an enormous movement. Goods, ideas, people, ambition itself. The station roars with energy beneath giant clocks and echoing announcements. Porters haul luggage through crowds while newspapers rustle and whistles shriek across the platforms. This is the empire in motion, and yet for all its confidence, little cracks occasionally appear. Workers grumble about wages, intellectuals question authority, socialists organise meetings, nationalists demand even greater power abroad. The city believes deeply in itself, but belief and anxiety often travel together. As evening falls, lights begin glowing across the monuments and boulevards once more. Snow drifts softly around statues while electric lamps illuminate columns, arches, and government facades. Berlin looks magnificent tonight. A capital convinced history belongs to it. A city of science, industry, uniforms, electric light, and monumental stone. Still unaware that within only a few years many of these proud avenues will fill not with triumphant certainty, but with marching soldiers heading toward a war large enough to fracture every confident promise carved into the city's cold winter monuments. At first, the unease hides itself inside newspapers. You notice it while standing beside a kiosk on a cold Berlin morning as headlines flap in the winter wind. Diplomats argue somewhere far away. Naval budgets increase again. Alliances shift. Speeches grow sharper. International incidents appear briefly beside advertisements for soap and theatre tickets. Most people continue walking. Work still begins at the same hour. Bread still costs too much. Laundry still waits at home. Yet something in the atmosphere feels tighter now. Berlin in the years immediately before the First World War remains outwardly confident, energetic, and modern. But beneath the optimism, many citizens sense growing tension across Europe. International rivalry intensifies between major powers, while newspapers feed readers constant updates about military expansion, colonial disputes, and diplomatic crises. The future begins whispering before it starts shouting. You fold a newspaper beneath your arm and continue through streets already alive with movement. Trams spark overhead. Soldiers march toward barracks. School children hurry across intersections. Nothing visibly collapses. That is the unsettling part. History rarely announces disaster clearly in advance. Most people still buy groceries and complain about weather, while empires drift toward catastrophe. A Berlin journalist writing shortly before the war observed that the city seemed permanently excited and permanently nervous at the same time. Industrial success and technological progress inspired enormous pride. Yet public discussions increasingly revolved around military readiness, alliances, and national competition. Everybody talks about strength. Very few talk honestly about consequences. You stop inside a cafe where businessmen read financial reports beside officers scanning political news. Conversations drift toward naval construction and relations with Britain. One man insists Germany deserves a greater place in the world. Another warns Europe feels dangerously armed already. Neither finishes coffee peacefully. Public interest in international affairs grows dramatically during these years because mass newspapers circulate information faster than ever before. Berliners follow diplomatic tensions almost daily through headlines, editorials, cartoons, and patriotic commentary. Modern media accelerates anxiety beautifully. One particularly revealing habit from pre-war Europe involves citizens studying maps in newspapers during international crises as though ordinary readers might personally reorganize global politics between breakfast and work. Humanity truly loves pretending geography becomes simpler after coffee. Outside, snow melts slowly into dirty water beneath carriage wheels and tram tracks. Berlin appears prosperous despite the cold. Construction continues. Factories operate constantly. Department stores glow beneath electric lights. Yet political meetings grow louder in beer halls and cafes. Socialists criticize militarism and inequality. Nationalists demand greater military power. Liberals worry about constitutional reform. Workers organize strikes. Conservatives fear social collapse. The city argues with itself endlessly. A recurring question among modern historians concerns whether Europeans before 1914 understood how dangerous the political climate had become. Some evidence suggests many people feared war openly. Other records reveal widespread assumptions that diplomacy would ultimately prevent large-scale conflict as it had before. People often believe civilization itself acts like a safety net. Berlin especially seems too modern, too connected, too economically advanced to destroy itself through continental war. Trains link cities rapidly, international trade flourishes, scientific progress accelerates yearly. Surely civilized nations would not risk all this. Surely. You pass a military recruitment poster pasted beside advertisements for cinema performances and winter clothing sales. The contrast feels strange. Entertainment, commerce, and militarism share the same walls now. A group of students marches past singing patriotic songs, while nearby factory workers exit a meeting hall discussing labour rights. Their visions of Germany overlap imperfectly. The empire contains many futures competing simultaneously. One lesser-known social trend from these years involved growing public fascination with aviation and airships as symbols of national prestige. Crowds gathered eagerly to watch flying demonstrations, while newspapers celebrated technological achievement with almost childlike excitement. At the same time, military planners quietly imagined how those same technologies might function in war. Human invention and human destruction rarely remain strangers for long. You enter a railway station where soldiers mingle with travellers, merchants, students, and families carrying luggage through clouds of steam. Platforms echo beneath announcements and bootsteps. Trains symbolize modern order and efficiency, but they also remind you how quickly armies could move across Europe now. Industrial civilization builds excellent tools for both tourism and catastrophe. A tired woman near the platform sells newspapers while discussing rising food prices with a customer. Daily concerns remain intensely local, even during moments of international tension. Rent, coal, illness, school fees. Most citizens cannot afford to spend every hour worrying about diplomacy. An editorial published in Berlin shortly before the war warned that modern Europe resembled an armed camp, disguised as peaceful civilization. Another writer mocked such fears as exaggerated pessimism from intellectuals addicted to drama. Future historians continued debating which attitude proved more common among ordinary people. Standing here inside the station, you suspect many citizens simply moved between confidence and anxiety depending on the day. Outside again. Evening approaches through low-grey clouds. Electric lamps flicker awake across the city while church bells echo softly through the cold air. Berlin still looks magnificent. Busy avenues full of life. Department stores glowing warmly. Crowded cafes humming with conversation. Factories pouring smoke into the darkening sky. Yet now the confidence feels thinner somehow. You notice the soldiers more sharply, the headlines more frequently. The nervous energy beneath patriotic speeches, and everywhere. Time keeps moving forward with absolute indifference. One final anecdote lingers from these years. During international crises before the war, some Berliners reportedly rushed to cafes and newspaper offices searching desperately for the latest updates, while others deliberately avoided political discussions entirely, preferring music halls, restaurants, and ordinary routines instead. Denial can look remarkably elegant beneath electric lights. Night settles slowly across the capital. Snow begins falling once more over statues, barracks, cafes, factories, and crowded apartment roofs. Berlin continues living exactly as before, for now, because the people hurrying through these streets still do not know that within a few short years the confident world surrounding them will fracture so violently that this entire city, with all its certainty and ambition, will seem afterward like the memory of another civilization entirely. Midnight settles over Berlin slowly, like soot drifting down through cold air. The city does not sleep all at once, One cafe extinguishes its lamps while another still glows brightly behind fogged windows. A final tram rattles through the snowy streets, carrying tired workers home. Somewhere far away, a factory continues operating beneath the darkness because machines have no interest in bedtime. You walk quietly now. The crowds have thinned. Footsteps echo more clearly across frozen pavement. Snow softens the city's sharp edges while electric lamps cast pale circles onto the streets. Smoke rises from thousands of chimneys into the black winter sky. Berlin breathes in its sleep. You pass apartment buildings where ordinary lives continue behind curtained windows. A mother rocks a crying child beside a stove. A clerk removes stiff boots after a long day at the office. Students argue softly over books and cigarettes in rented rooms. Somewhere a couple laughs together. Somewhere else another couple sits in exhausted silence over unpaid bills. The city contains millions of tiny endings to the day. A municipal survey from the years before the war estimated that Berlin's population had grown so rapidly, many long-time residents barely recognized neighborhoods from their own childhoods anymore. Streets changed, buildings rose, factories expanded, electric lights replaced older darkness. Modernity arrived block by block, and still the city kept demanding more. You cross a bridge over the Spree where black water slides silently beneath ice and reflected lights. The air feels colder here away from crowded streets. Your breath hangs briefly before disappearing into the night. Behind you, Berlin stretches endlessly. Church towers, factory chimneys, government domes, apartment roofs carrying fresh snow, railway lines fading into darkness. The entire capital looks strangely peaceful from a distance. That may be the greatest illusion cities ever create. One writer who wandered Berlin at night shortly before the war described the capital as both magnificent and lonely. A place where millions lived almost pressed against one another, yet still carried private fears through crowded streets. Large cities magnify everything. Ambition, loneliness, excitement, exhaustion, hope itself. You continue walking beneath electric lamps humming softly in the cold. Their white glow still feels modern and slightly unreal, as though the city refuses to surrender fully to darkness anymore. A cat slips between alley shadows. Snowflakes drift lazily through the light. Somewhere nearby a piano plays faintly behind apartment walls. Berlin sounds gentler after midnight. A final newspaper edition waits outside a kiosk announcing political tensions, industrial growth, military speeches, and economic forecasts. Tomorrow morning people will buy these papers while drinking bitter coffee before work. They will complain about weather, about prices, about crowded trams and noisy neighbours. Most will not imagine that historians a century later will study this exact city with fascination and grief, searching for clues about how ordinary life felt before everything changed. A curious memory survives from elderly Berliners interviewed decades later. Many recalled the years before the First World War not as a dramatic age of approaching disaster, but simply as normal life. School lessons, family dinners, winter streets, Sunday walks, factory shifts, arguments in cafes. History rarely feels historic while you're living inside it. You pause outside a bakery preparing dough for the next morning. Warm light spills across the snow while workers move quietly behind steamed windows. The smell of bread drifts into the frozen street. Tomorrow is already beginning somewhere. A few soldiers pass beneath the lamps. Collars turned high against the cold. Their boots crunch rhythmically through fresh snow before fading into darkness. Soon enough, many young men like them will march away from Berlin believing the war will end quickly. Some will never return. But tonight they're only tired soldiers heading home through winter streets. That difference matters. A long-running scholarly discussion asks whether Europe before 1914 should be remembered mainly for its confidence or its fragility. Standing here now, both feel true. Berlin glows with scientific progress. industrial energy, cultural brilliance, and ambition. Yet beneath the surface lies tension, inequality, exhaustion, nationalism, and fear. The city shines brightly because it burns so much fuel, coal in furnaces, labour in factories, nerves inside crowded mines. You walk onward through quieter districts now. Laundry lines sway gently between dark courtyards. Snow gathers on abandoned wagons. A distant church bell marks the hour while somewhere a baby cries through thin apartment walls. The ordinary sounds remain the most powerful, not speeches, not monuments, not military parades, just human life continuing room by room across the sleeping capital. And slowly, very slowly, the pace of the city softens. The last trams fade into silence. Cafe doors close. Footsteps disappear. Snow keeps falling over Berlin's statues, factories, beer halls, schools, and apartment roofs until even the crowded streets seem calmer beneath their pale white covering. You breathe in cold air touched faintly by smoke and winter. The empire still stands. The lights still glow. The future still waits quietly beyond the horizon, and for one final moment before history arrives with all its terrible momentum. Berlin in 1910 rests beneath the snow as simply a human city full of workers, dreamers, mothers, students, servants, officers, children, artists, and tired people trying to stay warm through another winter night. Now the street's empty completely, the lamps hum softly, the snow continues falling, and your footsteps fade gently into the sleeping heart of old Berlin, in the quiet after midnight. The city finally loosens its grip on the day. The smoke drifts more slowly now above the rooftops. Snow settles across silent tram tracks and the dark curve of the river, behind curtains and frosted windows. The last lamps disappear one by one until entire apartment blocks seem to exhale together into sleep. You can almost imagine Berlin resting peacefully at last. No factory whistles, no shouting conductors, no marching boots. Only the soft murmur of winter wind moving between buildings that have watched millions of ordinary lives pass beneath them. And somewhere in those sleeping rooms are the people you walked beside tonight. The laundress with red hands beside steaming wash tubs, the tired office clerk straightening his collar before work, the children reciting lessons beneath portraits and chalk dust, the servant girl carrying coal upstairs through elegant buildings, the soldier marching proudly through snowy streets, the artist arguing about the future over bitter coffee. None of them know what history will soon demand from them, but perhaps that is merciful. For now, they remain safely here in 1910, inside this glowing city of electric lights. Crowded courtyards, beer halls, horse carts, smoky factories, and snow drifting gently through the winter air. You leave them there slowly. The river darkens behind you. The church bells fade into the distance. Berlin becomes softer and softer beneath the falling snow until it almost feels like a dream itself, half hidden beneath smoke and lamplight, waiting quietly in the silence before another century fully awakens, and as the city finally settles into sleep, you do the same. Sweet dreams.